Hey everybody, it's your friend Adam here with everyone's favorite potential red pill consumer. And I feel like we're actually getting close with Isaac. The backstory here is Isaac, a longtime friend of mine, asked me to red pill him potentially for a documentary project. He's made some documentary films in the past. We've had some back and forth. It seems Isaac is not really, he doesn't believe it's possible for us to red pill him. He may be even considering attempting to blue pill us through some documentary film work. So I actually feel like we are close. We are on the precipice of actually red pilling Isaac. Some things have transpired in some of our personal private conversations that make me think Isaac is a lot closer to being red pilled than we imagined. I have a ton of people messaging me saying, I want to talk to Isaac. Isaac is deluded. He's in the progressive bubble. Isaac is totally out of it. And they really just want to come on and beat up on Isaac, which I understand. It's a culture war thing. But I don't want to give up on Isaac just yet. I actually think that we are close here. We are very close. Despite many people's belief that we are further than ever imaginable, that there's no possible way Isaac is going to get out of the progressive bubble. So I wanted to bring on one of my friends, Drew Welty. He's a psychology guy. I believe you're working on your doctorate, or what are you working on, Drew? I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I have a degree in psychology. It's like right there, but I'm working on my master's in clinical mental health counseling right now. So essentially,
Okay.
I'm training to be a counselor slash therapist. So that's what I'm doing at my educational.
Okay.
Right now, yeah.
So last time we spoke, Isaac, I said we had a disagreement over the definition of conservative, and you had said something that really stung a little bit. You had said conservatives are deluded. So I wanted to bring on an actual conservative to argue perhaps that Drew here, our fellow deluded conservative, is maybe not deluded and just has like a different philosophy about life. So Drew, would you consider yourself a lifelong conservative?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say so. So I grew up here in Texas, born and raised. So I was kind of inculcated in a pretty conservative environment. I didn't really have political views until I was probably my sophomore year of college, but I very quickly picked up conservative lines of argument through just basic stuff because I got introduced to politics essentially through gun rights because it's big here in Texas, and being pro-life. And essentially, those two arguments lead you down the conservative area. And then I found out that a lot of just conservative arguments just intuitively appealed to me more. So the progressive ones just didn't. They sort of landed flat with like my sort of the structures that I had been raised with in my head. So you and I both know about moral foundations theory, but like this essentially has a lot to do with it. So I intuitively understood the conservative arguments because of the environment I grew up in, and so now I'm sort of stuck with that. And yeah, so I've just been that way. I engage with a lot of different ideas, but at my core, regardless of my specific positions on things, I'm pretty much a conservative. Yeah.
So I don't want to. My goal here is not to have like an argument or anything like that. I deep down I feel like Isaac's heart is in the right place. Like he wants to do what's right for society. He wants to do what's right for marginalized people. I mean, I have those same intuitions. I would guess, Drew, studying clinical psychology, you have those intuitions that you want to help people overcome their personal challenges. I think we're both Jordan Peterson fans, and Jordan Peterson famously, I mean, he's been pilloried in the media, totally mischaracterized as something he's not remotely, but he wants to help people as well. So I just thought maybe we could facilitate a conversation. I mean, we can take this any direction you want to go, Isaac. I felt like if you had a good exchange with a conservative, it might make some headway towards you better understanding the conservative perspective. I think the point that we differed over, and maybe this is a good starting point, is that you had mentioned that you conceptualize conservatism as just being in favor of the status quo without any kind of questioning of the status quo whatsoever. And I mean, I tried to argue that position, but I'm not a conservative. I've never been a conservative. I never grew up a conservative. I grew up in hippy dippy California. Okay. I spent half my life being in the same position as most hard left progressives, thinking that conservatives were just, bigoted, greedy racists. That was my perception of conservatives. So until I read Jonathan Haidt and sort of examined the conservative philosophy from another person's perspective, I never really respected it. So Isaac, I've talked for a long time. Do you want to interject at all?
No, I'm glad to see you, Drew. We've interacted on Twitter before. I think it was months back, but I remember it being cordial and insightful. So I'm glad to see that you're on.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know if I'm not sure what I had said before, but there's a tendency to conflate conservatism and Republicans, the modern current Republican Party, and I think those are different. I busted out. I've got a book called The Conservative Mind, which is an anthology of various conservatives, and I busted it out after last week, but I didn't actually crack it back open, and I hadn't for ages ago, and I wish I had now because I'd probably be better informed. Yeah, otherwise I'm not sure. I do think we should cover one thing before we go, and that is whether Adam thinks I was lying last week, because that's sort of a big impediment to moving forward.
Well, other people have accused you of lying in the comments, and I have defended you, saying that you would probably cast that as some sort of journalistic deception in the pursuit of a scoop.
No, I wasn't sure. I haven't gone back and listened to last week, but there was a quote that pretty much said, there was a comment on it that pretty much said I was lying. I deceived you. It's a weird quote. I was trying to parse the semantic meaning of it because it didn't seem coherent to me, but it definitely said that I had deceived you in the documentary thing. And then you posted to Twitter. I don't know why Isaac would be dishonest. If that's their opinion of my motives and behavior, then that's gonna, oh, you got a surprise guest.
Yeah, she's walking out.
Yeah, it's great.
I wish
family visiting at any moment. I lost my office. I'm sitting in my bedroom, so at any moment I might have family come running in. But I just thought, I don't care that much. I don't think you think I'm a liar, but I just thought it was peculiar.
I'm gonna try to bring up the comment that you're talking about specifically, because they were saying this was a disagreement that we had about you saying you could read minds, that I was saying that we can't know people's inner intention. We've had many sparring over whether or not Trump is a racist. I've said, I can't know Trump's secret intentions. Maybe he's a secret racist, but I haven't seen any outward signs that would make me think this is definitive evidence that Trump is a racist. And I feel uncomfortable in this environment calling someone a racist without definitive proof. So like, I'm comfortable calling Richard Spencer a racist because there was a piece of video that dropped where he's being the fucking racist piece of shit, right? So that seems like definitive proof to me. I feel no discomfort calling Richard Spencer a racist, but before that video dropped, it seemed like there was a lot of people making a lot of accusations. Of course, all of those people will say, hey, we told you all along that he was saying this stuff secretly. But until that evidence surfaces, I like to give people the benefit of the doubt, just because it's like being called a racist is tantamount to being called a pedophile these days, which is just, it's not a charge that you want to throw around willy-nilly. So this mind rating thing that you had, you stuck to very tightly. You were saying, we can know people's inner intentions because they simply tell us their inner intentions. And the comment was basically saying, well, Isaac told us his inner intentions were he was trying to get red pilled and he was going to do a movie. And it turns out that was not exactly the case, that he was really he was intending on blue pilling us. And I even went back and listened to some of the prior episodes, because you had kind of changed the narrative a bit to say that we were that it was never your intention to be red pilled, and that this was always just two old friends catching up and talking. But in several of the earlier episodes, you even say that you're offering people money to send you information that would red pill you. So that leads me to believe that that narrative is correct, and maybe you're just misremembering it. So
yeah, no, it's still my intention. I mean, I still see this as a doc film. I'm not sure. Last week, I thought I laid out some caveats in the beginning. I didn't think we were streaming, and so I had prepared myself for different tasks, not conducive to lucid debate or conversation. So I thought I'd sort of prefaced with that, and I still see this as a documentary as much as I did previously, in that I'm a filmmaker. Everything, and as you're an artist, everything we always see and have seen all our lives are potential fodder for the next project.
True. Very much so.
It just seemed to me, I couldn't understand some of it. I didn't understand the mind reading, and now I think I understand the importance of mind reading. The importance of mind reading is taking people, trying to have a good faith, charitable opinion of what people's intentions are in their actions, and not taking their worst things, I guess. So, but we don't have to get too far off on this. I just thought it was
I found the comment. I think the comment is important because it's Danimal the Bruce. He's a prolific commenter on my channel. He's always got insightful things to say. So he says, does anyone find the comedy in Isaac saying that you can ascertain a person's inner motivations when he admitted at the beginning of this very stream to deceiving Adam as to the premise of starting this stream project, because he successfully hid his inner motivations? The ability to lie is a powerful tool and can manipulate reality around you. It's useful. It's as useful in the as it is destructive. It's a great way to say mask inner motivation. So and you were evidently, I didn't think you'd be triggered by this at all, but evidently it was a little disheartening to you. Obviously, I guess I should have known.
It's only disheartening to me in that it seemed really quickly. Like, first of all, I wasn't arguing that lies don't exist. The first thing I did was look up data on lie detector tests, and they're nearly 90% correct. So you absolutely can tell somebody's internal motivations to a 90% certainty using a lie detector test. This is not true. I just, the comment seemed like I was arguing against lying, but the reason I care at all is because I don't want this, and I don't care on a personal level, but if this is slowly, and I don't think you're going to do this, but how useful the audience is to the project and in sort of prodding me along and putting me on the spot with good questions. If people are going to it seemed to me like a tactic to say, oh, Isaac lied, I don't have to analyze any of his other assertions or positions because he lied once and now I can disregard it. And to me, it just seemed like a really opaque attempt to just not engage with any of the ideas, because if you call somebody a liar, you don't have to take any of the other stuff seriously.
Isaac, there are tribalists among us, okay? At any given time, that do not want to see any progress made. They want you to go back to your side and us to go to our side and pull out the guns and start shooting. Okay. Those
Boogaloo.
Yeah, those people exist. They're here with us now. Danimal the Bruce is not one of them. I don't perceive Danimal the Bruce as a tribalist at all. And the reason I emailed you that was because it was right on the money. It's like, it's so obvious. Like I
didn't go back and listen. The only thing I remember from that segment last weekend was a joke. What I thought was making a joke when I said, "Oh yeah, it's a long con cancel," but I don't remember the rest of that. It's possible. I guess it's possible that I did seem to be vacillating and contradicting myself. I still see this as a film project, and perhaps I didn't put that well last week, and it appeared that I was lying. I'll bust out my Walt Whitman.
First of all, we're being extremely rude to Drew.
Yeah, sorry,
I expect Drew to be a much bigger part of this conversation. So, but
let's move on. I thought it was odd. That seemed to be like a big sticking point from last week. And
it was never a sticking point for me. It was like my response in the comments was, and it seemed like a good jumping off point as I try to use these things because we did a live stream with me and PSA Sitch on James O'Keefe quite some time ago, and James O'Keefe engages in journalistic deception all the time, and the right always gives him a pass, So I don't see why they wouldn't be giving you a pass if you're engaging in the same type of thing in pursuit of a scoop. And I mean, but immediately they hit me in the comments with how Isaac would never give James O'Keefe a pass, which seemed like probably true. So,
well, if you look at his original footage and then you look at the way he edits it, I'll put together just a little fun 5-minute edit of our previous conversations that make you look like a psycho Nazi, and then we can see whether deceptive editing is a big problem for O'Keefe.
Drew, do you want to jump in on the O'Keefe thing if we're going to go in that direction? My goal with bringing Drew on is you keep trying to put me in the conservative seat, and I feel like I'm arguing conservatism terribly because I'm not a conservative. I brought up a John Stuart Mill quote because I think it's important. This quote I actually got from Jonathan Haidt's book. A lot of people will be familiar with it, but he who knows only his side of the case knows little of that. His reasons may be good and no one may have been able to refute them. But if he is equally unable to refute the reasons on the opposite side, if he does not so much as know what they are, he has no grounds for preferring either opinion, nor is it enough that he should hear the opinions of adversaries from his own teachers presented as they state them and accompanied by what they offer as refutations. He must be able to hear them from persons who actually believe them. He must know them in their most plausible and persuasive form. So that's why I want to bring Drew on, because I'm arguing from a perspective of like, I don't necessarily, I mean, I feel like I have a good grasp on them, and I'm happy to say that I do. But I mean, even we had a talk with Carlin, and I think Carlin, I don't even think Carlin would consider herself a conservative. I don't think she was born into the conservative movement. I apologize, but I don't know Aiden's background. I think Aiden does call herself a conservative, but I don't know if she's grew up a conservative. So Drew seemed like a good person to reach out to. You want to jump in here, Drew? Do you have anything to say on any of this stuff?
Yeah, so I caught last week's show, and I think that there was like a little bit of talking past each other on the intention point, because I thought that what your friend here was trying to say was that we can kind of make assumptions about people's intentions, and a lot of times those assumptions can be correct. But I think that what got hung up is he used the word know, like we can know people's intentions, which made it sound a lot more certain than I think a lot of people in the comments are probably comfortable with, because to some degree we make assumptions about people's intentions, and sometimes we're wrong, but they are assumptions, so we can be misled or misunderstood about those things. So I think a different word would have made that a lot less contentious in the chat, because the word no, it comes with a lot of certainty associated with it, and especially when people are talking about intentions, it's really hard to know people's intentions. So that's probably where a lot of that got hung up. And so far as like lying is concerned, I mean, like I don't know, like I'm not super concerned with trying to catch anybody in any particular thing. People are kind of trying to understand their own intentions a lot of times, and like it gets mixed up in all this stuff, and maybe they don't communicate it. I'm not super concerned about that. As long as y'all are okay and y'all are still friends, I think this project's just fine, regardless of whatever maybe film project is going on in the background. I don't think that's that important, to be honest. I think that everyone's here in good faith.
Yeah, I think that you're right about the no. No has a degree of certitude that I normally wouldn't. I'm not certain about almost anything in this world. And so no, and my intention was much more philosophical, to say certainly people can lie, but you can also, the whole, I've said this over and over last week, I remember that the whole point of communication is to convey what your intentions are and what's going on in your mind. And if you assume that communication never works, then I don't know how you can never have good faith dealings. And then the lie detector thing, it's kind of reductio ad absurdum, but lie detectors, there's good evidence they work 90% of the time. It means that you can know people's internal motivations 90% of the time. I don't want to get hung up on that. Now that I see, like, a lot of the thing here is that I don't understand the context of things. So we're arguing about something, and I'm looking at it in a certain philosophical or ideological way, but the intention behind even discussing this is towards another point. towards another purpose, and I don't see that other point in purpose. So if the point of mind reading is, as related to cancel culture, probably that people are making assumptions about people's motivations, they're making the worst assumptions, the least charitable assumptions, then you don't want to be like, oh no, I'm reading people's minds and all of you fuckers are racist because I disagree with your policy on, food stamps or something.
Yeah, and that's essentially the conservative critique, is that there's far too much mind reading on the left right now with the intentions of the right. This is something that Jonathan Haidt pointed out in his newest book, Coddling of the American Mind. He talked a lot about, there's this thing called cognitive behavioral therapy. I don't have to go into it, but there's several things called cognitive distortions within the theory, one of which is mind reading. It is considered a thing to make people unhealthy because they start assuming people's intentions, and they assume the worst intentions, and they start getting really unhappy and unhealthy. And it seems pretty common for people on the right to feel pretty openly mischaracterized by the left. And this is exacerbated by the fact that there's sort of a discrepancy in understanding between the right and left. So some research that Jonathan Haidt did actually indicates that the right is more capable of understanding the left, and the left is capable of understanding the right. They still mischaracterize each other, and they exaggerate and they stereotype, but the left seems to have a particular hang up with being able to believe that the right cares about harm and fairness, and they don't believe that the right cares about hurting people or justice or any of these things, which can leave the right feeling very misunderstood and mischaracterized. If you point at me, who cares about people, I'm trained to be a counselor and a therapist, and tell me that I don't care about people. And that's one of the things that happens so much, and that's why I think the mind reading thing is a big hang up for the right, because it's something that's constantly a part of being on the right, is being mischaracterized.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think a lot of people on the left are operating from an emotional space, and they're like, if I knew all the arguments that the smart people I trust are telling me, then I could convince the conservatives that they're wrong, not that they're immoral or not good people. It's that they have a mistaken understanding of reality. But almost nobody, left or right, can really talk about all of the details of these things, because folks with PhDs can't talk about the details of these things. Yeah, I think that's legitimate. I think what the left has a problem with these days is figuring out what is true and what is fact, and I imagine the right has the same opinions on the left.
Yeah, I think that there's a tendency on the left to sort of run away with things, and so like the left, I think, has really good intentions. A lot of times, I don't really like the thing on the right where something negative's going on the left, like they're going too far, and then they assume like, oh, they're trying to undermine society, they're doing XYZ, they're trying to do this. Because I think on the whole, I think a lot of people just have good intentions, and maybe they're just going too far. It feels to me intuitively on the right, there's more of a intuition to question things, and maybe like, what are the consequences of this policy or whatever. And oftentimes when I talk to people on the left, what happens is like, so like if we're talking about some topic like minimum wage or something like that, I'm the one questioning, okay, well, what does that do to our economy? What does it do to this, and this? And then they're the ones screaming in my face that it doesn't matter and we need a living wage or something like that. And so I feel like the left can like push themselves like into like a corner sometimes, which stinks, because I think that the left has a pretty important place in our politics, because if you imagine we have a country of just conservatives, it would probably stagnate. And I'm saying that as somebody who's on the right. So we need that push and pull of the progressives pushing us a little bit and the conservatives questioning us the consequences. So I think we both need to be a part of it. So it's unfortunate to see like both sides start demonizing each other so much, because I think it's actually really, really toxic to the country and everybody involved in the practice.
Yeah, I think cognitively it's just a problem with the human brain in general, that we grab onto these polar ideas because they're simpler, they're easier to grasp, they position us in a way which is much more righteous. Like, I don't think that anyone on the right, and I think very few conservatives in our country are like the Taliban, and I think very few people on the left in our country are going to want to send people to gulags. But these are this sort of imagery and argumentation we latch onto, because the clear black and white things are much easier to argue than the shades of gray. And I absolutely think that conservatives, hey, for where I live, I'm actually pretty centrist and maybe even fairly conservative, because I live in like one of the farthest left zip codes in the US. So there are shades even within the left.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Man, one of the most interesting things to do is to hang out in lefty spaces and watch them argue amongst themselves who's actually not on the left and who's actually a secret conservative and who actually, yeah, it's just, man, that's
Yeah.
that's a crazy thing to be a part of.
This is a good jumping off point here, because last week the last question that I threw at Isaac was, do you believe that if you're not progressive, you are by default right wing or conservative? And we sort of stumbled over the definition of what right wing means in according to conservative. But Isaac answered yes on that question, that if you aren't progressive, you are technically right wing, which I would love your take on, Drew.
That's hard. Labels are really difficult because they mean different things to different people. I would say there's probably at least one other category, which is probably like non-involved political people that don't really have a political philosophy. I'm sure that some people on the left will tell me about like the philosophy of why being not involved is somehow conservative because you're not pushing this, like, but to me, it seems there's utility in being able to describe the people that are sort of disgruntled, I'm done with politics type of people that don't have a particular leaning either way. Because I think conservative means a particular thing. It has a certain set of values, especially within American context. It sort of means like conserving like X values from the Constitution or the country's founding or something like that. And just saying that someone who's not involved falls into that category maybe feels a little wrong. In some sense, it's probably true, but I think there's utility in at least one more category. But I mean, that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I think that'd have to be modified to amongst the politically active. Though I do think a lot of progressives would argue that if you're not involved, if you're not seeing the issues in our society, then it's irresponsible.
That's terrible, because then you're casting. How do you classify someone who has positions on both sides of the political spectrum? Then you're saying if you don't have consistent progressive views, then you're right wing. What if you're right? What if you're pro life and you're for universal health care?
Yeah, that's good. I mean, there can be contradictions within Paul. I'm not saying this within
How is that a
policy. I'm
contradiction?
talking as
Like,
a
how is
pure.
that a contradiction? How is that a contradiction? Like, if you're
Well,
pro-life and
for me,
universal health care, how is that a
you have to
contradiction?
fully define pro-life. For me, it's a very simple thing, and I'm not
Do you,
talking about pro-life in a larger thing, because the left wants pro-life to be much more about after the baby's born. What about after the baby's born? To me, abortion is a really simple thing. Like, give people access to.
you're not really answering the question, Isaac.
Okay, what's the question?
The question is, somebody has, and I just pick these randomly. You don't have to go off
Mhm.
on the
Someone
position.
has overlapping
They have
ideological
positions,
views or
right?
policy prescriptions
And
that traditionally fall on the left or the right.
and the positions are generally based on somebody's read of the facts on the ground. So there's not a question of inconsistency. Like, if you believe in God, you might be pro-life, and you could still be pro-universal healthcare. And those positions are classically on opposite sides of the political spectrum. So you're like, what if you're? Do you have to have all your positions have to be progressive, or your like what is the tipping point for
Well,
right wing here?
I don't know. I mean, those are tough also because these are changing. The policy prescriptions are not necessarily anchored to an ideology. And I think you can look at that because at least lip service was paid to some Republican replacement for Obamacare, with the aim supposedly of being getting people access, people who do not have insurance, getting them access to medical care. You would suppose that would be the aim of any healthcare overhaul on the right, or at least making it so that people who were being personally responsible, that were working two jobs, could have decent healthcare. So this idea of universal healthcare, I don't think is a
Are you
progressive position
trying?
fully
Are you?
anymore.
It sounds like you're trying to take the two random positions that I came up
And
with and
use those. Okay, so
make
just
them
in general,
ideologically consistent
what
between the
does it
two. But
mean?
then you create a world, Isaac, where there are these few numbers of people out there who are ideologically consistent, and everybody else is wrong. Like, that's not the world we live in. The world we live in is people generally don't care about consistencies, and those consistencies, people take a position on on a topic because they absorb what they believe to be factual information and come to some reasonable explanation about why that is. Someone might be pro-life because they believe in the afterlife and souls and this kind of stuff. So if that is true, then their position is rationally coherent. So what I see and why this bugs me so much is because I see progressives using categorizing somebody as a right winger as some ideological purity test, and they want to know if they're the ones we should be aiming the guns at or they're the ones that we should be defending. So it's just like it's a strictly tribalist move that bugs the shit out of me. Because how can we find truth if we're forced to, like, if we don't take into consideration that our tribe may be wrong about something, how are we ever going to come to any realization about truth?
Yeah, that seems reasonable. The truth thing, I don't know. I lost you a little there on the truth thing because I spent a lot of this past week looking into the Sachs guy that you like, and that I was also kind of bugged that you were like, Isaac's a perfect example of hates cherry picking stuff from the internet. I'm like, dude, first of all, everybody finds their information on the internet, and secondly, there's some very compelling. There's some very
I read books
critiques of Sachs and his work, and so to speak about truth requires reporting against oneself. It requires exactly that quote that you read before. You have to understand the opposing arguments if you really want to get towards truth. These big, huge philosophical things, like if you have one conservative position and one liberal position, then what are you? I think you can have a conservative position on one issue and a progressive opinion on another issue and still be consistent, rationally consistent. So I don't mean to say that you only must have all policy prescriptions or all paradigmatic ideas of how society works and be totally on the left or totally on the right. I also think that these things are very malleable and that they're very slippery and you can easily switch things around. I keep thinking about this. You say people don't change their political preference, but you didn't have any sort of idea of opinion on cancel culture until 5 years ago. And so the idea that you don't change your political preference only applies to existing notions, whereas things that pop up new in society are not so susceptible to these preconceived opinions. The way they're framed, the way you're introduced to them means that you can come at them from a different left or right ideology because they're not a concrete concept in your mind already, that are already sort of in the constellation of how your ideology works internally. Well, so I don't know if that answers you. Seems slightly tangential.
Doesn't answer me at all, and I'm affected by your designation because you're saying because I classify myself as a centrist because I have firmly held political opinions on both sides of the ideological spectrum, that because I am not progressive, I am right wing. Which makes me think, okay, I've literally brought Drew Welty on to argue the right position because I'm not right wing. And every time PSA Sitch and I have a conversation for more than 15 minutes online, everyone in the chat is like, these guys are fucking liberals. Yet you're willing to sit here and call me right wing. Why are you doing that? What is the purpose of that? If it's not to just signal,
sometimes just to troll you, sometimes because
so
your
then you admit
positions on trans rights are conservative. Your positions on, I don't know what else trans rights seems to be. Your positions on cancel culture are conservative. When you look at cancel culture, you see it as a weapon the left is using against the right, even though you don't have a firm definition of cancel culture.
What are you
so
talking about? I have the firmest definition of cancel culture going. I gave it to you in half a tweet.
I know, and you retracted it. There's a thread on there. You said cancel is being fired for a lie, and then there was a long thread between you and Al Washburn about how that's not the case.
I never retracted it.
You modified it.
I never modified it. I said you bring up an interesting point, but I focus on the lie aspect of it because it's strategically useful. Okay. 90% of this stuff is based on lies. Cancel culture is canceling someone based on trumped up charges that are lies. The most recent canceling of Gina Carano, she was canceled because she is anti-Semitic. She is not anti-Semitic. That is a lie.
Well, it is also not a truth that she was canceled for being anti-Semitic. She
Then
could
why
have
was she
put
canceled?
those same words over a picture of a puppy on fire, and Disney probably would have had a similar reaction. She associated herself with abhorrent imagery. She could have used other imagery that wasn't the Nazis chasing down a lady in her underwear with blood on her face. She could have used some other abhorrent image that had no political valence.
I don't want to get sidetracked on this, but I wanted to bring up something else too, because this is the thing that bothers me. And I mean, I don't know how this is not a completely progressive position when you're talking about the progressives. Oh, empathy, empathy, empathy. Like it was a punch in the gut when you said conservatives are deluded. I literally thought of Drew when you said conservatives are deluded. Like that's so evil. Like it's so evil to say
it's
people
not evil to be deluded. It's perhaps not the mistaken.
Oh my God, Drew, would
Not
you put
completely
deluded
informed.
on your resume? Is that something that you put close to the top? Like, you know what? what are some of your core personality characteristics, Drew? Deluded. I'm fucking deluded.
I know I don't view myself that way.
Who deluded is probably the most common characterization of you, Isaac, in the comment section. Okay.
In the comment section, yeah, I think there's some selection bias in your audience.
Do you define yourself as deluded? Is that something that you?
I could, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of information to be had in the world. Here's what I mean by deluded: is Drew, do you think that people? Drew's got company.
No, go ahead. I'm listening.
So one of the things that I always feel that conservatives are very mistaken about is that they think they're very much more essentialist, that there are qualities of a person which make them behave and respond in a certain way, rather than there are environmental factors in which most people will be incentivized to behave in a way. And so for me, the progressive view, one of the main differences between progressive and conservatives is progressives see situational problems. When people have poor behavioral outcomes, they chalk them up to environmental reasons. People are responding to incentives or disincentives in their environment. On the right, it seems much more pull yourself up by the bootstraps, personal responsibility. Personal responsibility is very important in the narrative, but as a causal factor, I don't think that personal characteristics are as important as environmental characteristics.
So what's interesting is that I don't know. I'm trying to think of a conservative that ever actually said to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, because I think it's usually something that's said as a critique of the right, not as something that the right actually believes. Because if you listen to conservative philosophy, a lot of times what you hear is people are inherently evil and they need like things like religious institutions in their environment to help constrain that evil. They need rules within their government to help govern them and secure their rights. I mean, I think there's sort of a disagreement about what level at which we like create this environment, but I think the right very much believes in human beings needing to be constrained within certain circumstances to help them. I don't know. I mean, like the right does place more of an emphasis on personal responsibility than I think that the left does sometimes, but I don't think that those positions are mutually exclusive. I think the right values institutions and trying to create positive institutions for people to like adhere to so that they actually have those positive influences in their environment. It's just, it doesn't always come from the government, which is something that can be a sticking point for people on the left. So the right very much cares about group oriented stuff. It's just at the social level rather than the governmental level. And I think that that's one of the things that get missed. For some reason, action is sort of conflated with government all the time on the left. So people on the right very much believe in environmental aspects to things, especially me as like someone who's got a degree in psychology. I'm like, that's like a part of everything. And what you're essentially talking about is the fundamental attribution error, which is attributing more to the individual than the circumstances. And you sort of like overemphasize the free will or whatever you want to say of the individual in the particular circumstance. So I fully understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, and the left always, I think, sometimes naively assume that everyone's good, and I do assume that the vast majority of neurotypical or non-typical, but people who don't have some sort of damage, or there's some physiological issue in their brain which is causing them to act as a sociopath. And that's very Lakoff there. This idea, the 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 right sees people as in evil that need to learn discipline. It's a failing of parents to not teach their children discipline. Authority should be handed down and respected, and it's worked for so long that we should, there's the traditional respect for the traditional. The left, I think, is much more people are good. If we can stop them from wanting for food or shelter, then they won't commit crimes. I think there's a middle ground between those.
Yeah, and I absolutely think there's a middle ground. I mean, it's just like when I start thinking about like whether or not people are inherently good or not, it's really not like a black or white, like this person's evil type thing. It's just people are sort of don't really have. I don't believe that people choose the right things most of the time. So there's a game theory experiment where they allow people to like put money in a pot, and if they put money in a pot, then everybody gets money. But if you don't put money in the pot, you sort of have like a free rider problem where you're getting the payoff from everybody else, but you're not contributing anything. And what they find in this is that early on, people start contributing, and then they quickly realize this free rider thing. Like, if I don't put anything, I leave the experiment with more money, and they start doing that. And so cooperation just plummets, and things just go awry. Just people's natural intuitions towards wanting more money as they leave the experiment. And then they introduce a new rule where they can pay a little bit of money each round to punish the people that actually leave out. And what you see is that immediately people start cooperating again. Like, now that we've introduced a rule here that if you screw everybody, and it's a social rule, they don't have to do it. It's not imposed on them at all. Then the cooperation shoots way back up. And to me, that seems like a social group rule attempting to constrain the negative behaviors of individuals. And that would, to me, be like essentially like core social conservative philosophy is trying to create group-oriented social things that make people's behavior better. So like when the right talks about, I mean, you say that like some people think, oh, the right doesn't care about environment. I mean, the people screaming at the top of their lungs that the most important thing for children is to have a good family environment is the right. I mean, they care about the prime and first environment that children are in before anything else. That's the prime thing that they care about. And if you look at things within psychology about like attachment theory, and even going back to like people with more psychoanalytic tendencies like Freud, there's a huge emphasis on early childhood development in these things. I don't think the right's perfect on this, but I think that the right does care about these things. It just, for some reason on the left, they just don't see it because they see it as basically all they're trying to do is be authoritarian with their values rather than assuming that the right cares about the inculcation of like good behavior and social rules amongst children and stuff like that. I think the right gets mischaracterized too frequently as just being hyper judgmental. There is a little bit of that. I'm not going to lie. There's a little bit.
Well,
of that.
we'll see what happens with this Romney extension for the child tax credit in a few months. Romney apparently, it's pretty new stuff. I'm not sure that I have all the facts correct, but it's my understanding that the bill that passed last week, and it includes a big child tax credit, that Romney wants to make that permanent. So if the Republicans support that, 0 Republican votes on this last bill. And if they support this, then we'll see if that bears it out. And I think that's another environmental thing. People, for some reason, I'm reminded very much of this idea that like the link between marriage and wealth, right? And this idea that if you stay married, you're going to be wealthy. But there's this body of evidence that I'm only becoming familiar with that seems to show much more strongly that the causal factor is reversed, that if you have money, you're more likely to stay married. And to me, that seems like another one of these looking at the causal factors backwards. If people stayed married, if they had the internal gumption to stick through this rocky marriage, then they would end up more successful in the long run, which is undoubtedly true. But then their ability to stay in this rocky relationship is hugely influenced by how rocky it is. And when you can't pay your rent or feed your kids, it's a lot more rocky than fighting about where you're going to dinner or something.
Oh, I mean, I agree with that. The more stressors you have within a relationship, the more it's going to put pressure on the relationship. I don't disagree with that at all. I think that it's clear that marriage, or at least like long-term intimate relationships that are like held together, marriage makes it harder to leave. So that's part of the reason that it helps. But it's important. It does help. There's a lot of benefits to it emotionally and economically and all these things. But obviously, if you're lower down the economic, I mean, it's going to put more pressure on the relationship. I think that's just sort of like, yeah, I don't see a reason to doubt that. It seems obviously true to me.
Hey, I want to jump in on the Romney thing, because I see you do this a lot, Isaac. You tend to conflate like the political parties with the life philosophies. So when I'm having a conversation about conservative versus progressive, I'm very much talking about rank and file progressives, rank and file conservatives. These are people who I conceptualize as binded within like a moral community that polices one another. Now, as soon as you jump into the political realm and start talking about Romney or Ted Cruz or any of these politicians, I completely change my lens of the world, and I start looking at it from selectorate theory, because politicians will suck anyone's dick for votes. Okay, they have no political philosophy whatsoever. Chances are 90% of them are fucking psychopaths. Okay, so to conflate the rank and file conservative who generally wants to do the right thing, who has a moral outlook on the world and is voting not, oftentimes against their own economic interest in favor of their moral interest, to conflate them with someone like Romney, who just is trying to cobble together a political coalition so he can attain the highest status, get his name furthest in the history books. It's just, it's very wrong to me. It seems like a miscalculation on your part. And sometimes I wonder if it's done. I mean, it's politically expedient, because when you're comparing politicians who have already said, I believe 90% of them are probably psychopaths, with normal rank and file conservatives, it's easy to say, our political opposition, the people in the other tribe, are psychopaths, just like their leader. Like, I look at Biden and I think the exact same thing. I mean, Biden's kid is fucking doing all this crazy. Like, tell me Biden's kid is not a psychopath.
I don't see Biden's kid. I don't know a ton about it. It seems to me like a lot of the right-wing media is fairly trumped up on the charges against him, and it's my understanding the charges against him are pretty milquetoast. They're like tax.
I don't want to make this conversation
a couple of gifts.
I don't want to make this a conversation of you defending your political leaders. I guess you don't see.
Well, I was going to defend Romney, and he's not my political leader. I don't see that about Romney at all. Romney has
right.
He doesn't need to build a coalition. He's in there. He's golden. I think his father was a governor, right? I'm sure his approval rating is really high. I imagine he won his last election with a very large margin.
Do you see though this different lens?
Yeah, absolutely.
What is your take?
I don't see mine as much. I see yours much more. You talk about selected theory all the time, and yet you don't think that Trump would pander to the far right.
I do think
white nationalist supremacists. I mean, you're very angry about any suggestion that Trump might be a racist or that he might coddle racists as part of his selectorate.
This is another, like I said, taking the facts on the ground and trying to come to the right position based on the truth. Okay. How could you say when I just said that, any politician would suck anyone's dick for votes, that I don't think Trump would pander to fucking Nazis? I totally think Trump would pander to Nazis. Okay. But we have a different worldview on how many fucking Nazis there are to get votes from. If there's 10 fucking Nazis, it doesn't make sense to pander to Nazis as a voting coalition. Okay. You guys are the ones that believe there's hundreds of thousands of millions of Nazis. Listen, I wrote down, because I want to bring this up, David Dole, a YouTuber here with 500,000 subscribers, very, very popular on the progressive side. I was listening to a live stream of him yesterday when he characterized the whole situation as conservatives are more interested in voting for racist policies. Conservatives are more tied to racism, more interested in racism than their own economic self-interest. And that is the problem. That's why they don't vote progressive because they're all racist. That doesn't measure up with what I see on the ground.
Yeah.
What is the voting? What is your estimation on the voting constituencies of actual Nazis in the United States? Like if I go out and say, listen, I'm the Nazi candidate and I want your vote. How many votes am I going to get?
I'm not sure of that. It's not none. I know that.
Yeah, but is it going to, like 70 million people voted for Donald Trump? How many of those are actual Nazis?
None. How many of those are racist or who harbor racism without acting on it?
You tell me.
Race, I would say a fair percentage. I've been trying to find some good polling on this. I found some Pew polling on the general sense of race relations and the trajectory of those. It's hard. No, it's very hard to get people to say, yeah, I am kind of racist when a pollster calls them on the phone. So these things,
right? That's why the mind reading comes in handy, right?
Well, no, I mean, there are other ways to tease these things out. Right? You can ask other questions that aren't quite direct and then make assumptions. And I'm not saying you're mind reading. I'm not giving it 100% confidence. But I think within some confidence interval, you can figure out how many people are racist.
Drew, are you comfortable telling who you voted for? Or
but even more problematic, go for it, Drew.
Yeah, I didn't vote at the top of the ticket. I'm serious.
Welcome to the resistance, brother.
Well, here's the thing, though. I reserved my right to have voted whoever the fuck I wanted to, but I chose to not vote at the top of the ticket because Trump had done some stuff that I didn't like, and I thought that, like, as a conservative, for me, there's sort of two philosophies on voting. Like, whether there's a pragmatic philosophy, which is like you've got one vote, it doesn't really matter. Like, you should vote for who more closely aligns to your values. And for me, I sort of generally fall into that category. I feel like Trump sort of crossed a threshold for me where I wasn't okay, like, putting a stamp of approval on him because of some of the stuff that he had said leading up to the election. That being said, I know.
Do you mind telling us what this stuff was?
Oh man. So there was a bunch of weird stuff. Like, number one, he sort of like he can't. When I was watching him, I don't think he really is able to respond to criticism. And for me, number one, there was a lot of policy things that he did that just were not conservative. So like tariffs are not conservative. That's like, so just on a policy front, he did a bunch of stuff that just has nothing to do with like my values. But on top of that, it was really like a lot of the rhetoric stuff that I just didn't like. And I didn't feel okay putting a stamp on. Like, for example, like in one of the presidential debates, like I can't understand why he would think this is an okay comment. And I don't know what his inner intentions say, but when he's talking about whether or not people show up to court dates as illegal immigrants, he says the ones that do show up are frankly very low IQ. And I'm like, okay, so
the person doing good, yeah, exactly.
I'm like, okay, separate from whether or not this is a racist comment, it looks so bad. Like, why? And this is our president saying that. And there was a bunch of other like little stuff like that. It's like, I just don't know if I can do this. So I chose not to vote for him. If I was in so I live in Texas. If I was in a closer state, maybe that would have been different because I feel like within my country or within my state, because maybe my vote doesn't affect things. Maybe the best way to use my voice is to not vote for him or something like that. But that being said, I mean, it was a close decision for me just because I'm pro-life and I'm pro-gun. And I mean, like, that basically means that if I don't want more abortions to happen or more abortion regulation to get removed or something like that, then I basically have to vote for the right. So it was a really hard decision for me because of those particular issues. But yeah, I mean, that being said, like, I know tons of people that voted for Trump that are like extraordinarily nice and good people. And I think I think it's unfortunate that the left overemphasizes the extent to which racism is a part of this. I think that most people on the right vote for him in spite of all these stupid comments that he makes, and they don't like it. It's been really nice to not have to defend stupid crap out of this person's mouth for the past few months, even though I don't have a government that necessarily represents my values. But yeah, I just think, I don't know how many people on the right are actually racist. I think that and it also depends on what your definition of racism is. You can sort of construct a definition where basically anyone who doesn't purport to follow these policies are the equitable policies. So anybody who doesn't follow these policies or advocate for these policies is now in category of racist. I mean, if you want to define it
Yeah.
that way, then anyone who isn't your political side is racist. But I just don't think that any sort of like normal definition of racism catches any significant amount of people on the right. It's a very small portion of people that, frankly, the right hates. So yeah, I mean, that's what I would have to say about that.
Yeah, there are assholes everywhere that just dislike anyone else outside of their circle, or just anyone else because they're not happy with their personal situation. The thing about this, the racism is tough because I think very few people are actively racist who would act in a way to harm someone based on their race. And then the other definition, which a lot of people on the right are really unhappy about, is this idea that the racism is being redefined to be systemic things also. And I don't think it's fair I think it's fair to say it is racist to continue policing practices as they have historically been in our country. If you don't look into that, supporting those practices is supporting a racist system. But to take that to the individual level and say, oh, you individually don't support those, then you must be a racist. I don't think that's fair at all. And I think that most people with a complete set of facts will come to similar. A lot of people on the right are very unhappy with policing and the use of state power, of state violence and state power. It's when they become intractable the moment they become politicized. But I think everyone agreed that like $27 million, that Minneapolis paying out $27 million to the family of George Floyd, that it is in the interest of everyone to stop practices which are going to cost a city, like, I don't know, it was like 15% of their yearly budget they lost in one fell swoop because one cop who had a long history of being kind of a psycho took it way too far.
Yeah,
Murdered somebody. And so,
and look, I mean, there's nothing more conservative than trying to guarantee the rights of everybody, right? The
mhm.
entire point, like, so the values that I'm trying to conserve are the values of the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution, that all men are created equal, right? Everyone deserves rights here. That's our goal here. And if people are not receiving equal treatment, then that means that their rights are not being upheld to the same degree, and that's not okay. That being said, the police conversation gets so complicated. It's such a difficult issue because the police are like a two-prong issue, because for the left, there's sort of like the arm of like mistreatment of people, and then for the right, there's sort of like the institutional security that upholds the system. So it's like, and then on top of that, the right, I think, has a tendency to understand police a little bit more and use of force and firearms and all these things and I feel the left is just really ignorant on use of force and firearms and stuff, unfortunately. But I actually did some block walking for Greg Abbott a few years ago to help get some votes out for him or whatever. And there was a questionnaire that came along with our block walk, and there was a bunch of like political questions, like what's the most important thing? Like one of them was at the time was like sanctuary cities. One of them was like gun rights or something like that. And then one was like protecting police. And every single door I went to said that protecting the police was the most important issue that they had. And these were not like wealthy areas. I mean, they were like pretty impoverished, like normal, like just regular conservative-ish areas. For some reason, the police are such a complicated issue because they're the opposites are just, and it's a very emotionally loaded topic. So that's really hard. That being said, the best way for me to deal with the police issue is you just have to take a non-passionate look at data to try to make your decision, because one of the things we know is that when people have an issue that's held close to them or is personally affects them, they just basically all that matters to them is anecdotal evidence and all of these other things, and not actually the reality of what is going on the ground and the data. So, I mean, the only way to fix this issue is to try to look at data and not be lambasted for trying to do that.
And get the whole picture. This guy would probably or gal, whoever this is, would probably have to have this person on Danimal, the Bruce, but because this good example of this was on one of our earlier streams. I had mentioned Ferguson, and Danimal's comment was, well, Mike Brown had just strong arm robbed a liquor store. He punched the cop. He didn't have his hands up. He didn't say hands up, don't shoot. All of these things. To me, none of that is the salient stuff. To me, the salient stuff is what the Department of Justice found that the city of Ferguson was doing, was the environment in which this occurred. And so it's not and the same with George Floyd. I mean, I guess the guy was on drugs. He'd had previous run-ins. The most spectacular cases are probably going to be the ones in which the perpetrator or victim, depending on the circumstances, is also the sort of most extreme actor. That's when these things elevate to a place where, Mike Brown happens or George Floyd happens. It's always the non-state actor in those situations, I think, is much more likely to be an extreme example of the police interaction. But then you look at Ferguson, and the DOJ came in and found all sorts of unconstitutional policing. A huge amount of their city budget was coming from fining people for like spitting or jaywalking, like a crazy amount of bench warrants that they were using. They're basically funding city operations in a non-trivial amount by just fining people.
And something to
So
clarify about.
Hold on, that's a good reason to defund the police then?
Defund the police is a terrible term.
Well, no, I'm saying, listen,
yeah, if you're
they're funding the
employing
city
cops,
off of shaking down marginalized people, and you want to defund them? You want to give them less resources so that they have to shake down more marginalized people?
No, but you want to redirect those. The defund police is terrible sloganeering. And, we both have talked about how poorly the left does at branding.
Do we agree the city is obviously, do we agree that the city is obviously underfunded? That the problem is the city doesn't have enough resources. They're forced into this situation where they have to shake down marginalized people to get more resources. Like this is
not necessarily. I mean, the city leadership is predominantly white in a town that is predominantly black, in a town that had previously been predominantly white, but the classic white flight to the suburbs probably changed their tax base.
Okay.
The leaders of the city could change their revenue scheme. They could raise taxes. They could apply for grants. There's other things they could do, but they were intentionally shaking people down for fines.
Yeah, that's totally fucked up.
And that's the situation in which this happened. And so if you're talking about the instance of Mike Brown getting shot versus the environment in which it happened, you're having two different conversations, each of which I think win on their terms.
It's a good point. So the chat wants me to ask you, can black people be racist? Because I know you have a little bit of a bent towards critical race theory. So I think it's pertinent to the conversation.
On a personal level, I would say yes. I don't know about this. The whole power plus prejudice is a new equation for me for looking at these things. Black people can undoubtedly be prejudiced and bigoted. Okay. Whether they can be racist depends on which definition of racism you're looking at. And I think it'd be useful if we had a different term for systemic racism, the historical, continuing institutional oppression of marginalized groups versus the individual cognitive and behavioral actions of.
So we just had a conversation where the word racism was used multiple times, and it just occurred to me that you mean something completely different about when you say the word racist than when Drew says the word racist. Because when Drew says racist, he means prejudice, bigoted. You just said when we're talking about prejudice and bigoted behavior, yes, they can, but racism, you're obviously conceptualizing as something completely different because you said no.
Well, Drew, what's your definition of racism?
Well, what definition are you using? I think I'm using the classic.
To me, there are two definitions. There is bigotry, prejudice, and then there is a system which differentially exploits certain people based on race.
Mm-hmm. I think so. There's a couple things I want to say. Number one, I would say that I think that racism is essentially the personal bias and prejudice that people have. And I think that the separate thing that you're describing is just more easily described as structural or systemic racism as a separate term. And I think using just the word racism for both is highly confusing. Mm-hmm. So whenever I'm talking about some of this, I would be having a discussion about like systemic racism or structural racism rather than talking about just the word racism as being structural racism, because that's just confusing as hell for people involved. The separate thing that I would say is that what really irritates conservatives, and I'm seeing a lot of people say something like this in the chat, which is that number one, I should say, from what I understand, the Ferguson department was doing a bunch of screwed up stuff, right? I don't know that there's actually anybody that contends with that. But the specific case has been investigated, like, I think 4 times now on different levels, and they have found no wrongdoing on the part of the cop. And the reason that people are saying, I think people are kind of mischaracterizing you in the chat, but like when you say something like, well, the reason I care about Ferguson is because there was a problem there, but you're not talking about the specific case that brought Ferguson up. It feels like to some people that basically what you're doing is you're using the misinformation around the specific case to justify, like you're okay with the misinformation as long as it really leads to like some positive outcome in the actual level. So like the misinformation is justified because there's some good action with the police force or something like that. And I don't think you're necessarily saying that. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to respond to that, because I don't think that's
yeah. I get so distracted by the chat, I just turn it off.
Yeah,
but I mean, I knew about there's video of the strong arm robbery, right? He steals like a box of cigars or something. I mean, there's video evidence of that. It's hard to dispute any of that. Whether other people on my side of the aisle don't know those facts or misrepresent those facts or deny that they're part of the overall narrative, then that's just not a genuine. Well, I mean, I don't think it's legitimate, but it's also the degree to which these should be highlighted when looking at the overall set of circumstances that led to this happening.
Yeah, and one of the things that's important to note here is that for me, what's important in this case is not that he strong-armed robbed someone else. The issue for me in this case is that specifically in the interaction with the cop, he was fighting with the cop, reached for the cop's gun, and then the cop was having issues getting this guy off of him. And then when he finally turned back to charge him, the cop decided, I cannot fight this guy off of me. He's probably going to kill me. So he shot him. So the specifics in the immediate case were such that the cop was in fear of his life and defended himself. It's really not, because the reason I'm saying this is because there's a point on the left that gets made that's just true, that just because someone did a crime whatever amount of time ago, if there's not use of force needed in the specific case, then it doesn't matter what it did before. Right. So, but in this specific case, there was reason to use deadly force here. Yeah. So that's why I'm mentioning that, just to be clear.
Yeah, I was just looking at that this morning. My understanding of those events were that he fired 2 shots while he was still in his vehicle. One missed and one grazed Brown's thumb. And so it is a little more complicated than simply the charging. So, and then at that moment, Brown had left, and I guess the immediate danger, I guess then the officer must have gotten out of his vehicle and started to follow him. Then Brown charged. I'm not defending either of their actions, and I would say that probably Brown had really miscalculated. But to me, this is another set of circumstances, because I know that, hey, I'm a super privileged white kid that grew up in a small, Oprah called my hometown the happiest place on earth, and I fucking hated cops because they were always bugging me. I always got out of it because I am eloquent and I have all sorts of cultural capital, and I could talk to them in a junior lawyer manner, and they were like, oh fuck, this guy's gonna be a pain in the ass, and if we throw him in jail without a good reason, and I was thrown in jail quite a few times for very bare minimum reasons. There were, if I had to deal with the kind of shit that I imagine folks in that neighborhood dealt with on a frequent basis from the police, I would probably fly off the handle at some point too. I'm not excusing what he did. I'm not saying it's a rational behavior. I'm not thinking this happens most of the time, but I think that the over policing of individuals coupled with the under policing of like solving serious crimes really influences how these folks see police. And obviously this guy was not having the best day of his life.
Yeah. And so I would say that the point you're getting at is that the behavior is understandable but not justifiable. And I would say I probably agree with that. Like, but the other thing is, from what I understand, there is a problem with over policing small crimes and then larger level crimes not being actually followed through with. From what I understand, part of the issue there is a lack of cooperation on the part of the communities, exactly because of this bad relationship. That's a really complicated problem to solve. I don't know how to deal with that, but I would just say that I think the discrepancy between focusing on like severity of crime isn't totally on the cops. I think it's partly like a relational issue between the community.
Yeah.
But I do take your point seriously. Yeah, and the issue for me as like a conservative on the police is just basically about misinformation on specifics of cases, because there's so many times where there's just so many things where the facts of the case are not important because the narrative is so emotionally loaded, and it's probably emotionally loaded for good reason. It's just the facts matter in the particular cases, and it ratchets up the country in a really negative way if we can see. So like for a while after, so we had George Floyd, and then we had the shooting in the so George Floyd's obviously unjustifiable, just to be clear, and then we had a shooting in, like, I believe it was like a Wendy's parking lot, which is that's a complicated case. And then we had a couple times there where there were just like plain open and shut crimes that occurred that were like viewed in the same lens as George Floyd, that were just like not anything to do with George Floyd. And that's the thing that concerns me on the right, is that when we get into things where it's the case, there was like one case where like a guy had a knife and was fighting with a cop and got shot, and people were upset about it. And it's like, okay. So that's what's a problem for me. I just on the police, I want the facts to matter. And I also want to care about like the historical mistreatment of communities or whatever. Like I want to try to fix that too, and fix the relationship between police and the communities too.
Yeah, and that's the circumstance. A very similar thing happened after George Floyd in my town. The cops shot somebody with a knife, but it was on video, and from what I could tell, the cops weren't super threatened, and the guy was obviously having a major mental health crisis. And so this is where I would assume that you think it'd be nice to have somebody a counselor who knows how to interact with somebody having a mental health crisis, who knows how to de-escalate situations, who knows how to get people to open up and receive help. And it'd be nice, I guess, if a cop was there with a gun just in case, but that the cop with the gun showing up first thing with lights blaring and somebody's having a mental health crisis is not the most effective way to deal with this. And that's what I wanted something more like refund the police, but that doesn't make a lot of sense. But to switch the funding, there's no reason to pay a cop $300,000 a year to do what somebody making $80,000 a year as a counselor who has specific training for these things. There's no point. It's a waste of resources, and it's not the most effective way to treat a lot of these. And so to me, that's what the defund the police is about finding a better allocation of resources so the cops don't have to. I have like major PTSD from barking dogs. And about 3 times over the past 10 years, I've gotten the police involved because I have neighbors with the dogs that won't shut up at 3 a.m. It would have been much better if they'd sent somebody at the level of a traffic cop than a fully armed police officer who came in and said, like, hey, listen, you have to shut your dog up, instead of 2 cops with guns showing up in their car at 3 a.m. to talk to my neighbor about it.
Wow.
We don't need.
What I think is
people will think I'm an idiot for doing that, but fucking dogs barking at 2 a.m.
We're running out of time here. This is a great conversation, but I do want to talk about one thing, and then I have a ton of super chats, which are questioned. A lot of them.
I wanted to bring one last thing up, just the sanctuary city, because this is what I think a lot of people on the right don't understand about sanctuary city. It's the same sort of policing issue. Sanctuary cities free people, undocumented folks, to speak to the cops. These folks are often living in the poorest neighborhoods with the highest rate of crime. If they think the police are going to haul them in and call ICE, they're not going to talk to cops. We're going to have less crime, less ability to investigate and enforce crimes. So I just wanted to say that we were talking a moment ago, reminding me of the sanctuary city, the liberal logic behind a sanctuary city is actually law and order, some portion of it.
Do you want to respond quickly, Drew, and then I'll... Yeah,
sure. I would say that on that front, if you wanted to do something like that, I mean, you wouldn't have to say that everybody in the state you wouldn't have to say the state isn't going to enforce immigration law. You could just pass a specific law that targets that and say we're going to grant some sort of immunity type thing to anybody that wants to report something, and we're not going to record who they are or where they come from if it's the case that they're a legal immigrant. You could very easily target this so that you could incentivize people to come forward to the police without saying fuck immigration law. Like
is there not? No, and that's part of the.
I've heard anonymous tip line like a fucking bazillion times. Is that not a thing?
Well,
Like,
but
do
if
these
you're
people not
at
have
an active
telephones?
crime scene and you're trying to find eyewitnesses at an active crime scene, and
Mhm.
suddenly half the people in the neighborhoods take off because they don't want to talk to the cops, they're not going to call a tip line after the fact.
Right, but they don't wanna
Yeah.
talk to the cops because they're afraid of reprisal from whoever committed the crime, not because they're worried about being deported.
I don't know about that, but I also think, Drew, that you're pointing to that, and the reason that it isn't a reason we might structurally not have sort of more pointed laws that are effective and narrow is because we're so partisan. You have to take a really strong, whether you're partisan right or partisan left, you have to take a very strong partisan issue in policy writing in order to get the support of your side, and that's not conducive to working across the aisle and passing these sort of much more benign and yet more effective and targeted laws, because they don't have the sort of sensational get your base behind you. They're not motivating. Reasonable, sensible policy is not motivating.
Yeah, that's where we're talking about selectorate theory.
Yeah, but
Sounds
you've
like
seen
sounds like you're a fan of
yeah,
selectorate theory now.
I am to some extent. I just think you are very selective in your use of selector theory. You're
What do you mean?
willing
How
to
am I
beat up
what do
on the left with this idea that they pander to their constituency, and then something like Trump obviously lying about the election, causing serious harm to our democracy. All of these states, Georgia,
Drew
Arizona,
shaking
all
his
these
head.
states
That
are
was
passing
God.
passing
Dude,
these voter laws that are. There's this crazy in Georgia. A reporter went. They passed like 26 laws, or they I don't know how many they've passed, but there were like 26 bills that he went and he asked a bunch of legislators, like, why are you doing this? And he got like a bunch of legislators. Their first thing was, that's a good question. And then their excuse for it was just like, who fucking knows? One guy's like, I remember the women in Afghanistan and Iraq had to dip their fingers in ink after they voted. And I think people should take voting seriously, and it should be he didn't say it should be a little hard, but he
Who
seemed to be alluding to the fact that like it shouldn't be too easy or people won't take it seriously. To me, it's just voter suppression. It comes off of this big voter fraud lie, which it harms our democracy.
Isaac, how are you characterizing me as giving Trump a pass on this stuff? Well, I'm not giving Trump a pass. I'm disgusted by the media making it so people are not even allowed to question the election. Like the media basically burying stories that are suspicious and like banning people's accounts if they question the election in any way, shape, or form. That's tyrannical.
Sounds like a straw man to me. I don't believe it. There was another thing that came up from last week. As somebody posted this, like, here's Isaac's red pill. It came from Fox News. At least when I started searching, first thing that popped up is the origin of the story. There's a writer for Slate called Dahlia Lithwick. She's a lawyer. She writes on the law, and she is also an opinion columnist for Slate, and she writes opinions. And in one, she's like really tearing on Kavanaugh about what a dick he is and what a horrible person he is.
I don't want to get sidetracked, Isaac. We're really
The
running
point
out
of
of
this
time
is
here.
I think what you just said is actually a misrepresentation. I don't think that's. I think that's a straw man that you're mentioning there. The point of the Dahlia Lithwick was her argument in both of them was let due process run its course, but it was framed.
We had a
as,
very long
Kavanaugh's
conversation. We had a very long conversation in this this show where we talked about how I said there's no possible way that Trump could ever believe that he lost the election. Okay. But that Trump was just deluded about all of that stuff. Okay. My position is clear here. I'm not giving Trump a pass for any of that stuff. I'm employing psychology here. Like Trump is a narcissist. There's no way in hell that he could ever believe that he lost an election to Joe Biden. Like the day he dies, he's going to believe that he won the election.
Yeah, all right, that's fair.
So
then I'm
everything,
all the other high level,
what you believe drives what you perceive. So everything Trump perceives is through that lens of I won the election. Okay. So like by your own admission, if Trump believes he won the election, the things that he's saying are not lies, yet the media is characterizing them as lies.
The thing that triggered me was our very first episode. You had this real like host hat on, like I'm a serious news journalist, the evening news with Adam Strange and all this stuff. And you're like, is it okay with you if your side cheats because you need to win something? And your selector thing was like, the left is out of power. They will do anything. They will subvert the will of the voters to get back in power.
They will.
And I was like, the evidence I see, I don't think they will. And you're in the context of this was those suitcases in Atlanta.
Yeah, those suitcases turned out to be bogus. You were totally right about that. But there are other situations, like there are tons of other situations where they did not check the signatures well. They separated the signatures from the envelopes very quickly.
I mean, to trust Brad Raffensperger,
there's
Secretary of State, that election was perfectly clean.
There are tons of cases where voters got multiple ballots that it would be very easy for them to send in 3 or 4 ballots and not sign them. We don't know because nobody investigated.
But they did investigate. There was a hand recount of all of that. I mean, this guy Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, he's an arch conservative. The dude was.
Hey, Isaac. If somebody sends 3 or 4 ballots in and they separate those ballots from the envelopes and then put them in the system, and then they do a hand recount of those 3 ballots, what is the outcome going to be of that hand recount?
Well, I don't want to do this hypothetical. If you want to do an episode
it's not hypothetical
on the election, it is hypothetical because neither you or I know the chain of custody. We don't know Georgia election law. There are particulars here which can be. And you don't trust it. You don't think it's designed in a way that protects the vote, even though
the chain of custody is like totally bogus nonsense bullshit. There is no chain of custody.
Who are you blaming for that? It's a Republican governor, Republican Secretary of State. If there's problems in their elections, they should have fixed it before the fact. This idea that they're now changing no excuse absentee balloting after they passed it in the 2000s, and now they're like, oh shit, minorities are using this instead of folks who want to stay home and watch Fox News.
Drew.
She was like, I'm having a snack. You guys fucking argue.
Well, all I'm saying is there is no definitive proof, and you have one side claiming that there's some kind of definitive proof, and I wish there was some definitive proof, but I haven't seen it. So,
well, there have been multiple investigations, and they turned up nothing. I can't remember who it is, if it's Heritage or someone has this database of election fraud. And it's like 1,200 strong, 1,200 instances of verified election fraud. You know, a lot of them are really stupid. People voting out of precinct. This poor woman in Texas who voted, but she was a felon. She got 5 years in prison. Like that. My point is that 1,200, a database of 1,200, when there are billions upon billions of votes cast every decade, is just an absolutely insignificant amount.
Drew, I want you to weigh in on this just before we move on. And we aren't even talking about the actual thing that I wanted to talk about. What are we at for time? Do you guys have to split?
I'm fine. I'm fine. I could use a little coffee break. I hadn't planned on going longer than an hour today.
We cannot go 3 hours because StreamYard will cut me off. I'm at the 20-hour mark, and I have a free account because. So, anyway, Drew, respond quick to the voting thing, and let's just move on to super chats. I'm going to skip the thing. I wanted to talk a little bit about self-interest, voting for your self-interest, because it's a common thing on the left where they say, you know, why do people vote against their self-interest? And it bugs the shit out of me because the left is we are morally great. We are voting against our self-interest. We want more taxes taken from us, which is like, okay, obviously you're voting your moral interest, yet you want conservatives to vote their self-interest. It makes no sense to me. So, but respond to the voting stuff, Drew. And
yeah, okay, so here's the issue for me. What matters to me is not like were there specific instances of like weird stuff going on. What matters to me was there enough voter fraud to alter anything? Every year there's a lot of voter fraud. There's like some little minor issues here and there. But what matters in a country this large is if it actually affects the outcome of the election. From what I understand, it did not.
I agree.
On top of that, from what I understand, there was a bunch of lawsuits filed by the Trump campaign, none of which actually alleged that voter fraud occurred. They were alleging other like weird things, and all of those cases but one got thrown out essentially. And to me, and by the way, I should note that a lot of them were thrown out by judges that Trump had appointed himself. So the biases are all in his favor, and still he managed to like somehow get like betrayed by everyone. To me, it doesn't pass the smell test. I'm sure there was weird cases here and there, but those are like sort of rounding errors, and I don't think that they affected the election. That's just my opinion. I think that Biden just happened to win. I don't know. It just doesn't seem like there was a bunch of voter fraud that actually changed anything. That's my position on it.
Okay, I just got 100.
Bill Barr agreed with you, and you know.
Carlin Bursinko gave me $100 super chat. Thank you so much. That's so generous of you. She says, someone needs to explain to Isaac that the Republican Party hates Trump just as much as the Democrats. Adam, upgrade your StreamYards for the love of God.
Seriously, take some of those.
Well, sometimes we
Some of
do
those
on
super
Zoom.
chat cash.
Sometimes we go on Zoom anyway. Well, thank you, Carlin. That's so generous of you. But so can we move? Do you want to?
What, Carlin, is all of that intended for Adam? Or is that I just sort of assume that Adam gets all the money, but now that he's raking in like a few $100 an episode, I have coffee expenses.
Well, I'm technically giving you $50 already because you said you'd pay me $50
That's
a week
true.
for this
Yeah,
project. And now I've actually brought in a future licensed therapist to deal with your fucking
how much Drew's going to charge me an hour?
Let's see. Since you guys are this is going well, and since you guys don't have a true time constraint, I mean, let's do the self-interest thing because I want Drew, and I'll let Drew start here. I'm sure you've heard this argument a million times from the left. It's the what's wrong with Kansas argument. It's like, we keep offering all these people, financial incentives. Why don't these poor Republicans vote for progressives?
Yeah, man. It's just a misunderstanding of how people think about things. It's if you can offer, like, people have different values. Usually when people say people are voting against their own incentive or against their own interests, what they're usually doing is they're projecting their own values onto those other people. They're like, I can't understand how they are voting against those interests, but they're not actually voting against their own interests from their point of view. So if you're taking, for example, like somebody who's like a run-of-the-mill conservative who doesn't want to be on like financial assistance or something like that, it could just be that they are morally against accepting handouts or whatever that means. So they're like against their own interests, but what they're doing is they're staying in line with their own values, right? And I think a lot of the time the voting against their own interests argument is really just like sort of a disrespectful way to like discount the individual preferences of people because you think that they should have your values. So like, for example, if there's like someone on the left who thinks that like a woman who's pro-life, they would say that she's like internalized sexism or something like that. Not that she has her own values or that she disagrees about this issue, but she's actually voting against her own interests. Therefore, she's got internalized bigotry against herself or something like that. It's like a rationalization rather than just giving them a like actual like letting them have the agency to have their own opinions and have their own interests and values and stuff like that. I don't like voting against their own interests line of argument. It's really frustrating for me.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I'll grant that. And I know I've said that, and I'll totally grant you that. And the equivalent for me is people come to me like, Isaac just says exactly what CNN tells him to say, and I'm like, I don't even fucking watch CNN. So I think you're right, and I have said that before. Voting is just self-interest, and I can see that that's a weak argument and something that I'll grant that and try to be more aware in the future because that's very legitimate and something that I think everyone does. People misattribute motives all the time in a way that benefits them way outside of the political sphere. Yeah, but you're right. Good one.
Let's move on to this. Let's move on to super chats. That was.
I'm interested also to talk about abortion at some point, but
we should do it.
This is not the time. Let's do
it another time.
That's like
we'll do it another time.
I'm sure Drew would love to come back and have another chat. So.
Sure. Yeah. Anytime.
Lord of the Nerds for $5. Isaac, ask Adam if he believes people only act in their self-interest. Then why does he object to critical race theory, which builds directly from this premise? So if he believes, you understand the question?
Well, I mean, I guess I don't know. He's probably what I say. I'm evading it, but as we're talking about right now, self-interest is not simply material interests. Self-interest is also self-conception, idea of categorical imperative, how people ought to react in these situations. I don't think anyone acts against their self-interest. I just don't think that self-interest is always a material self-interest. And my understanding, CRT, in as much as it's built on Marxism and dialectic materialism, is I mean, I don't really know much about CRT, but if it is based on Marxism, then it is based on material considerations, and rather than sort of moral internal.
Sure. But do you understand that the root premise of critical race theory is that white people will never vote against their their economic interest. That's the root of critical race theory. So they do separate out the component moral interest. Like we're saying right now, we've all agreed that people vote their moral interest and not their economic interest. Often they vote against their economic interest because their moral interest is more important to them.
Yeah, these things are also, yeah, I don't know. I mean, your statement earlier, like progressives are willing to raise taxes, and that's how they say, oh, they're selfless and the material things don't matter to me. But frankly, I'm willing to pay more taxes because it's all my wife's money. I don't go to work for it every day. I think she feels very differently than I do. But I also think that taxes, well spent, will in the long run increase prosperity for everyone. So in the long run, there is a material consideration to something like, it's not me just saying I'm a good liberal, I want people to be happy and safe, and so I'll spend more on taxes. It's also, I'm a good liberal, I'll spend more on taxes because I think my child's future will be much better if we can get a handle on childhood poverty. You know, there'll be less crime in the long run if we start treating these things now. So when my kids my age, my grandkids are around, then, you know, it is a long-term material interest rather
do you
than
understand? This is an interesting thing because it's kind of where the moral component and the financial component diverge, because a lot of conservatives I could see saying, yes, spending more money on schools theoretically would be great, but if the schools are teaching kids to be racist against one another based on skin color, then it's probably not a good investment.
Yeah, and conversely, if you believe that public education is a huge boondoggle wasting tons of money, then that's the argument you'd want to use.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And all that depends upon your, you want to respond, Drew, before I move on to the next super chat? That sounds like a no. Let's move on.
Yeah, it's fine. It's whatever.
Genetic disposition for $5 says, better not give any of this money to Isaac. He's just going to smoke pot and watch weeds grow in his garden. What a loser. So obviously,
this guy,
Isaac,
I have no weeds in my garden, tons of them in my system.
Somebody doesn't want to see you. Somebody doesn't want to see you get any of this money. Lord of the Nerds for. I keep trying to tell Isaac. We began this project. Isaac saying he would pay me $50 a week to kind of, you know, educate him as his.
It was a technical No, it was a technical retainer to do all the stuff behind the scenes and get me, so that I don't have to go spend an hour downloading the files and learning how to stream shit. And
but he did a few times, but I encouraged him to spend that money on an editor to actually like edit out the bits that he wanted. So Lord of the Nerds for $5 says, Isaac, ask if everything boils down to climbing hierarchies to get laid in a post-truth society, shouldn't Adam reject truth as a value? I guess he's asking you to ask me these questions.
I mean, it's a big,
you want to ask me
interesting question. Is your wife home or is she at work?
If everything boils down to climb hierarchies to get laid in a post-truth, shouldn't Adam reject truth as a value? I'm not sure I'm even qualified to answer this question.
I'd have to diagram it out. It's like an evolutionary psychology question at the beginning, right? We're just all trying to spread our genes out there. The post-truth society, see, I disagree with the post-truth society. And Adam keeps being like, oh, this is perfect height. You're just cherry picking shit that you find on Google. Dude, you can drill down and find these things. I found some very strong, very thorough statistical analyses of the Sachs guy Gender Matters and the studies he used.
I looked at those.
I know I found new ones. I found ones that are much better. The one I sent you was granted. The guy he called Sachs a conservative because
I have all of the studies. I have all of the studies that Sachs returned to the guy that he ignored. This is called
that's the one, the UPenn. No, the UPenn. I think you've got it right there.
This is called cherry picking, Isaac. This I read.
I'm not talking about that one. That's the one that I sent you at first. The one below that, the language, it's a University of Penn linguistics professor, I guess. And he talks about specific studies. The other problem with sex is there's two different books, I guess. The 2005 version that I have that these people are talking about, and a new 2017 version, which takes out a lot of the earlier sort of political hot button things.
Let's do one on the gender stuff. Because it's fascinating. So genetic disposition for another $5 says, Adam backed down on UBI. He knew Sticks and Hexenheimer was going to kick his ass, who, by the way, has an awesome garden. Oh, I didn't know.
Really? I didn't know that about Sticks. I'm just viewing his name. It sounds vaguely kind of unsavory to me. Styx was actually a pretty good band. The Hexes, I don't know, that's like witchcraft, and the Hammer is, everyone knows what that means.
Chris,
But if he has a nice garden, then maybe I should look at him. Somebody previously said I should watch his stuff, and if he has a nice garden, I'm much more likely to watch.
Well-known fact: conservatives have much better gardens than progressives. Progressives' gardens are overgrown with weeds. I
We're
know.
too busy saving lives.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
Sanctimonious, off the chart, right?
Yeah.
Oh, dude, if that wasn't an obvious joke, come on.
Well, we'll give you the benefit of the doubt.
The laugh was intended, and
Chris for $10. Hey Adam, great stuff here. Appreciate the content. Isaac, I can't speak for everyone. Lol. But I appreciate the effort from you as well, bud. Have a great day, guys. Yeah, I do. I mean, I'm conflicted because there's a lot of attacking Isaac in the comments. And there was one comment that I sent you, Isaac. I don't know if you remember, but it was from a woman, and it kind of relates to the why gender matters stuff. And she said that, you know, these are conversations she would love to have with her girlfriends, but girls are just so much more grudge oriented. And this actually aligns with Leonard Sax's studies in the book.
Yeah, no, and we had talked about that the week or two before, unprompted, and I was like, I hold fucking hella grudges.
Yeah,
because
we all know
that was like the only tool I had as a child. I didn't have any power, so I could just hold grudges and make an enemies list. And here I am 40 years later still.
We all know that you're 60% soy, though. There are feminine and masculine traits, and it does like that overcross the biological sexes. So I think there's a reason why.
I have man boobs for the first time in my life, which
I'm
not going to fight back too much on that. I don't think it's from estrogen and soy. I think it's from too much wine on weeknights. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate that. I think a lot of people thought we could talk for 3 hours and wrap this up. I see this as, if it's going to go anywhere, being a long-term conversation, bringing in more folks like Drew who are thoughtful. That, you know, it's hard for me and Adam too, because we've had so many of these conversations. We have so much background. If I feel cornered, it's really easy for me to just make a joke and Adam's going to laugh because he likes my sense of humor, and we sort of gloss over it. Talking to you, Drew, I'm much more likely to have like an earnest, sober conversation with.
For sure.
Lord of the Nerds for $5. In a hierarchy of evil with murder, surprise, sex, arson, etc. Ooh, I like this hierarchy. At the top, where do you put racism? Do you think society should regulate intention more? Isaac, I think that's for you.
I didn't understand the surprise thing. Surprise is on the list of evil?
Surprise.
How they should regulate racism?
No, surprise sex is, I think, the R word, that rape. They won't let them type rape in the chat, so they type surprise sex.
Oh, okay. I thought there were commas between.
You know, like
things.
Surprise, we're having sex right now. So of all the most terrible things that you can imagine, where does racism fit in that hierarchy? Is it above surprise sex?
I don't think we can legislate racism on the individual level. I mean, people are going to be racist. When you move into employment or government services, then that's different. I don't think we can regulate
I'm asking
internal racism.
I'm asking a personal question, though. Like, I would obviously put racism below murder, below rape.
Yeah, I would too. And I don't necessarily think that racism is a big sin. I think racism is a neurologically instantiated xenophobia that predates Homo sapiens. I mean, there's a evolutionary benefit to freaking out a little when you see something that doesn't look like you and act like you. As
Isaac's hero once said, racism is evil.
Oh.
No, that's Donald Trump. Racism is evil. Genetic disposition for another $5 says, you're only here to entertain me. I want blood. Okay, so we know where genetic disposition says. Genetic disposition for another $2. Isaac.
That guy made me lie last week. I was like, man, he's not going to pay Adam if I don't say something hilarious. So I just said the first thing. Truth be damned.
Genetic disposition for $2 says, Isaac, I seriously am against consistency.
Oh God.
Consistency is the hobgoblin of small minds. Do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I'm large. I contain multitudes.
What is that?
Walt Whitman.
Walt Whitman. Nice. Yeah. Alex Harris.
E. Cummings, man. We haven't talked about, the other film I'm working on.
Yeah,
is an
because we
E. Cummings
want people
biopic.
we want people to be interested in the stream. Alex Karras for $20 gives a thumbs up. Thank you so much, Alex. That's very generous of you. And I did, on your recommendation, give a wrench to Ahi, I believe, is who it was you were recommending. Oh man, it seems like okay. Classical Joe the MIG for $5 says classical Marxists are typically very pro gun rights. They certainly aren't right wing. The left right axis is too low a resolution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you talk to revolutionaries, like I talk to some pretty far lefty dudes over on Twitch pretty frequently, and they're all very pro gun because they want to rise against the So very
Protect
much
themselves from the man.
Yeah, revolutionary oriented. So that's true.
And that's a real libertarian ideal, I think. And libertarians, maybe not in the current political situation, but ideologically, libertarianism cuts across both spectrums.
Yeah, in some ways, it's there's like a value of liberty and stuff, and that kind of cuts both ways. It just kind of depends on what issue you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Vinicius Silvera gave me 27.90 R's, which I don't know what that is, and no comment, but thank you so much for the super chat. Lord of the Nerds for $2 says, if you aren't a socialist, you aren't pro-life. What? If you aren't a socialist, you aren't pro-life?
Yeah, so this comes from something that was mentioned earlier, which is basically like conservatives are only pro-life before the kid is born. It's a stupid it's not an actual objection to there's separate issues. I was talking to I was on a panel with Destiny last week, I believe it was, and he mentioned this objection too, and I pushed back on it too. I don't like it. It's a silly objection.
What is the objection, just to lay us out? I'm not sure.
So basically the idea is that conservatives are only pro-life up to the point where the baby's born, and then they don't care. But
get fucked.
Pull
yourself up from your bootstraps.
Yeah, but the truth is that there's separate philosophical issues about because like the truth is like, so you could have different positions. So like, for example, I don't think homeless people should be murdered, but that's a separate conversation about like what sort of
bleeding heart, Drew.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, I don't believe murder, but then like that's a separate conversation about like social welfare is a separate conversation from whether or not like someone has rights or not. It's a separate thing. And they're not mutually exclusive. They're not contradictory. So yeah, it's the same thing.
And it's when you start getting into the details, this whole Romney, I don't think we need to be incentivizing people to have tons of children. And that's a very much like 80s Republican thing to say on welfare. But I think the idea of just giving every child born a check, giving their parents a check, it can potentially create, poor incentives for just having a bunch of kids. I don't want to put a real fine line on that and say that I'm not making any strong point here because it's much more intricate than I'm qualified to talk about.
Yeah.
But I do think that's a potential thing where you're disincentivizing. It's a moral hazard. There's a potential moral hazard there.
Okay.
Alex Karras for $2 says, I believe that Azor is a good candidate for a wrench. I gave him one. Azor Ahi for $2 says, Alex Karras is a wise seer who knows all. Well, I hope he does, because I did give you a wrench. Use it wisely. Mike Testa for $1.99 says, can we just use the actual term National Socialist
for Nazi?
I guess. Yeah.
This is such a every time
Nazi has a sting to it though. Nazi.
Yeah. Well, oh man, I don't know if I'm gonna get in trouble with your chat, but like, look, anytime you find yourself trying to figure out which side the Nazis are on and like saying that they're actually on the other side,
I know
all you're doing is you're just trying to use Nazis against the other people. Like, they were bad people. You could talk about like psychologically, maybe they're right wing, but economically, maybe they're left wing. They were bad people. You don't need to use them as a cudgel to attack the other side. Yeah,
there's a great book on that. I got it on my bookshelf. I think it's called A Few Men or something like that. And it talks about just sort of average rank and file Nazis and how they started out as bakers and family men, and then how the environment, the political environment, changed them to do these really horrific things.
Yeah,
the frog in the boiling water.
In
Yeah.
our graphic novel, Suit and Skull Crusher fight Robot Hitler. So we know the value of the Nazis, definitely.
Oh man, I need to get a hold of that. That sounds awesome.
I know.
It's like a put you in jail free card.
We did this. The character design on Robot Hitler is so fucking cool. Like, I'm like, this is gonna get us canceled. You can't make Hitler look this fucking cool. This is like, this is terrible. He's got like this huge Nazi eagle on his back, and he's all chromed and shiny. It's crazy. It's crazy. Yeah, but we
They
take
had
him out.
branding.
We
Right?
we take him out though. We take out the bad guys around here.
That's true.
We take out the trash. Virgil G for $5 says domestic calls are the most dangerous. Isaac would absolutely get people killed. I was thinking that as you were talking about the social worker showing up, because that policy would last a week until the social worker got killed.
Okay, I see what he means. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you would just need, like, like if you had like a crisis specialist. So crisis intervention is like one thing that counselors do. So if you had like a crisis specialist, which is like essentially what hostage negotiators are, they're very similar to counselors. They just like have a different. They're more tactical in the way they use their stuff to try to get things resolved. You would need they would have to be along with police. Just because when you're talking about someone who's got like they're on serious drugs and they've got like a weapon, you just need police with them.
Yeah.
So, and I think actually he said that. I don't think he said that they would need to go alone. I think you actually mentioned that maybe like a police officer should.
Yeah, police officer accompanying.
Yeah, most of the counselors I know are not going to go. And a domestic violence situation is different than some guy on the street also having. Going into someone's home is very dangerous inherently when they're already you already know there's some very emotionally.
Yeah, this will get your hackles up, Isaac, because there's another guy who's a therapist on YouTube, and he constantly talked about how he never wanted for work because he was a big guy, and you realize early on working with mentally ill people that it's good to hire the biggest guy that you possibly can. So the women are at an extreme disadvantage here. So when the police force mandates equal outcome, it's going to be one of those little cute women that gets killed first, unfortunately.
Have you never watched an action movie? I mean, these women could be trained.
Exactly. I gotcha. You hear that, guys?
Dude's like, fuck you, I'm eating lunch.
Of course I did. I mean, I did see that Star Wars, and that girl, she like jumps up over the.
That's how things work in the real world.
Totally. Yeah. Lord of the Nerds for $2. I want to see a therapist versus Conor McGregor. Who's Conor McGregor?
Conor McGregor's
MMA guy.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's what I was. Yeah.
Hey, man, give me a month and I'll train and I'll kick the crap out of Conor.
You don't look like a small guy, and I got to admit, I'm just intimidated by that beard, Drew. Jeez, I'm running.
I'm 6'5" and I'm about 300 pounds. So
I'm torn.
I'm a big dude. Yeah.
I'm torn whether to run from you or actually hide in that beard. I think maybe
okay.
I think you might not be able to find me if I just grab on your chin beard underneath.
Sanctuary. Oh man.
Glib facsimile for $5 says, someone tell these crispy chicken nuggets dipped in mayo that they're still considered wacky carcinogens to the people who they're talking about, my saviors. Is that
I
think that's coded for he needs a mental health intervention.
I don't know. Average centrist for £5 says Ferguson reduced policing in 2015 and begged them to come back. Minneapolis tried defunding the police and it's going badly. A social worker has been killed. Really, average centrist says a social worker has been killed already.
Yeah.
That's hard to hear. I don't know why social workers are the ones that people point at immediately for these positions. It's sort of strange to me. I would think that you would want like a specialized, I guess social workers have to deal with crisis intervention, but for me, I think you would want to create like a new position that's like specifically a crisis interventionist that specifically only works with that. Because social workers kind of connect people with like like social resources and stuff like that. And then so I don't know why people always point out social workers for
I
that.
think it's what we're familiar with because it's sort of the non-police agency that deals with folks in these situations.
Yeah, maybe
is my guess.
Maybe that's what it is. Yeah. Also, I think someone was like almost so there's this idea of like the Ferguson effect or something like that, where like the idea is that basically now that police are like under scrutiny, they don't police in these communities as much or something like that. I just want to bring it up here because it's like sort of in the realm of what that question was getting at. I actually looked into this. I couldn't actually find any studies that actually found this to be true. I always thought that this might be true, but I couldn't find any data to support it. In fact, I found like a couple studies that were saying that they found no support for the idea. So if you want to like promulgate the Ferguson effect thing, I guess I would just say do your research because I don't know if it's actually true.
Yeah, I thought I saw a couple studies and they were like, lower police presence equals less shootings and less arrests, which is a no shit sort of conclusion.
Yeah, but yeah, I don't know. Well, yeah, that's sort of a separate conversation. We don't have to go into it further.
Alex Karras for $5 says, I would like to know how many different sets of glasses Adam has. The answer is 2. I just switched them. Joseph Nofsky for $5 says the left is now pushing their morals similar to how the religious right did 40 years ago. I completely agree. I completely agree with that statement. They're in the cultural driver's seat now, so they're the ones that have become the religious right in my estimation. So
well, you got all pissed off when I sent you that. There's a little tweet going around like, don't talk to me about cancel culture. I was a Christian in the 80s. We were canceling everybody from the, and that's back when there was like and the left was too, right? Like Tipper Gore was hated universally because she wanted
I got pissed off at that tweet.
I'll pull it up. Your response was, fuck that bitch. I don't know what she's talking about. Something like
but
that. That's a pretty benign tweet. I'm sure you were joking.
I'm joking. Yeah, obviously. I'm swinging for the fences. We're on Twitter. You and I.
Dude, Twitter is just an amplifier of ill behavior.
Or at least
ill.
There are few people. Most people I interact with on Twitter are strangers, and I don't feel comfortable doing some of the super edgy stuff that I'm willing to do with you, Isaac. So
yeah,
that's the thing. I if you don't know who's receiving the hate/edgy joke, then I'm less inclined to do it. So I want to do it. I wish we lived in that world.
People keep saying that I'm not actually conservative in the chat. It's kind of interesting to see.
Really? Oh yeah, my goodness.
There's some people that think I'm actually like not conservative, which is fascinating.
Well, it's probably the tribalists who are considered conservative, an identity group, and not necessarily a philosophy.
Yeah. So just for those people, so usually my content, like I have a YouTube channel, but I don't post on it very frequently. But most of my content is going on lefty streams and arguing with a bunch of lefties. I'll be going on one tonight. I do it like every week. So like, I mean, it's just
drop it in the chat and I'll.
Yeah, it's not on my Twitch channel, but it's I'll drop the Twitch right there. It's gonna be later tonight. It's like the Raj Royale if y'all had ever heard of it, but it's I mean, I'm going to be on there. I think I'll be like one of 2 or 3 conservatives arguing with a bunch of lefties. So, I mean, I'll link the Twitch channel that's going to be on.
I'll put a link to your channel or whatever you want me to put a link to in the description. I didn't already, but just send me that stuff and I'll update the description.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Alex Karras for $5. I would like to know how many different. I'm on. I'm up to this one, which I have on the screen. Mr. Uber Crocs for $20. Thank you. That's very generous. The election issue was much less about fraud than it was about constitutional violations. Many states changed their voting rules as a result of the pandemic. Most changes were ratified by Congress, but not in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Arizona, all states that would have been very instrumental in overturning the election, mind you.
Well, I'm not sure what he means by ratified by Congress. States set their own election laws within the bounds of the Constitution. All the constitutional challenges, I mean, just the final one was thrown out this past week by the Supreme Court. They didn't throw it out. They decided not to hear a challenge to some court. So all of these constitutional violations have been found by the courts to be not true. If you don't have faith in the courts, then it's tough to have a rational conversation.
Who has faith in the courts? If you've ever been involved in a courtroom, you lose faith pretty quickly.
I don't really know what to say about the particular. I don't know the specifics.
Isaac,
of what that objection is. So
we had a conversation about my jury duty experience, which gave me a
Which
lot.
we're not going to talk about on air.
Well, we're not
Or at least my
going to,
experience.
we don't have time to talk about it. But I mean, after that experience, my faith in the courts like plummeted to nothing.
Yeah, I'm not saying I have faith in the courts to come to the right conclusions. I have faith in the rule of law that people ought to respect the conclusions of courts as the final arbiter, whether they agree or not. That's what I don't mean that they always come to the conclusion I think is the appropriate legal conclusion.
Yeah,
but
it's part of the
once the Supreme Court
glue of
comes to a
society.
conclusion, I think
Yeah.
it should be considered a settled matter unless it shows up in front of the Supreme Court again at some
We
point.
have to. It's an imperfect thing. I mean, we have no other choice. Let's see. Lord of the Nerds for $5 says Isaac refuses arguments even for his side if it's from us. I set up 2 perfectly gotchas for him, and he balked at even that. Isaac needs to accept help.
No, I don't. Whatever he says, I'm disagreeing with, but I'm not sure which his. You just set him to. We should bring that dude on. We should bring
I would love to
the
have Lord
other
of the Nerds on.
who's the other guy? The
reach out to me, Lord of the
Danimal.
Nerds.
I'm wondering if Danimal the Bruce is I'm guessing the Bruce part means that they're male, but it could be Danica or something. I don't know. But those 2 people, they should come on. Let's
the
talk.
Bruce is a male, and he's also, I believe, gay married. So he's got.
And Al Washburn is not PSA Sitch's alter ego, because I noticed they have quite a bit in common.
I don't know who that is. Lord of the Nerds for $2 says a foolish consistency. Is that Emerson?
Something like that. I mean, there's a lot of arguments against consistency. The problem is that a consistency is hard to demonstrate when you're talking about very small, very disparate elements, which are nonetheless related. And
Dr. Cataclysm for $10. I think the left-right conversation is swiftly becoming obsolete in order to push our society forward. If we are to move forward as a society, we need to concentrate on up-down on the political compass. Yeah, I agree. Up-down is authoritarian versus libertarian, which I don't like because it doesn't illustrate the trade-offs. I think it would be better if it was order and freedom on the top and bottom, because authoritarianism is obviously bad. It's like
it's morally loaded.
Yeah. And libertarianism is obviously good. Yeah. I don't like to make political compasses with that, because it doesn't. You're really shooting for a balance. I mean, a lot of times you would there's like 2 unthinkable options at either end of the political spectrum. It's like complete state run industry or complete free market, corporate run state. So it's like 2
an
unthinkable.
8-year-old minor buying heroin with Bitcoin. That was my favorite thing, the libertarian.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, exactly. So
utopia.
So that one, I think, was obviously dreamed up by liberals, because they cast it like, here's the evil thing on the top and here's the good thing on the bottom, right? Which is falls into that thing from Haidt's book. The world is divided into good and evil, which is not necessarily true. What makes the world evil is the fact that good people disagree about things.
Ranked choice voting. I think that'll solve a lot of our problems. Instant runoff, ranked choice voting would sort of depolarize the political spectrum.
Dr. Cataclysm for $5. I apologize that I'm not bringing up all of these on to show on the screen, but it doesn't let me do that in StreamYard. Say escape into the ether if I don't get them soon enough. But Dr. Cataclysm for $5. I'm a clinical mental health counselor, male and ex-military. Every violent patient that my old mental health hospital had saw me pushed to the front. Yeah, I imagine so. Yeah, they're like, yeah, get in there, save us, Dr.
Everyone's practical. When their ass is on the line, everyone is practical.
True.
But I wonder when somebody was starting to show signs of aggravation, who did they push to the front of the line? When those similar patients were first starting to show the signs of being aggravated and they had a violent history, who tried to defuse them?
How do we deal with equity in this situation, though, if we want 50% men and women in this workforce?
Oh,
I don't think we do want 50-50.
The issue in the mental health field, there's almost no men. There's very, very few men. So it's actually the reverse issue.
Why do you think that is? Do you
I
think that's related to toxic masculinity at all?
I actually don't.
Oh my god!
Well, that's a triggering word. Do you think that's to do with gender roles and dynamics?
So there's a couple things. Number one, there could be sort of some socially introduced part of it, but there's also interest differences between men and women that play into it heavily. So, like, if you're talking about someone who wants to be a counselor, what you're talking about is someone who's like top percentile interested in people, and those people tend to be women. And there is evidence that interest is partially rooted in biology. So if you alter the levels of prenatal androgens within somebody, you'll actually shift their interests towards things rather than people, the more testosterone they have. So, but it also depends, right? So I'm like a very masculine dude, but I'm really interested in people. So it's like there's variance. So yeah.
Yeah, you've scooted back a foot from your camera, and I'm like, damn, that dude's fucking ripped. you are a big dude when you stick.
I'm big, yeah. But I also like people, so it's hard to know. I don't like the term toxic masculinity, but I understand the idea that you're getting at.
I can't get
and that's always my sense when people are like, well, in the Scandinavian states where they have all this equality of employment opportunities, fewer women go into tech, and I'm like, no shit. Tech is so boring, dude. It's modern day plumbing. Who would
you want to string up James Damore in the street? What's going on, Isaac?
I don't want to string him up. Yeah, I was thinking we'd talk about that today. There have been a couple notable firings of people at Google very recently for complaining about sexual harassment, and they basically did the same thing they did to Damore. They just shuffled him off and out.
How are you supposed to get a date if you can't ask people out at work? I mean, what the...
Well, it wasn't even that. It was like, of all of our coworkers, who would you have sex with? Wink, wink to the new young lady in the office.
Oh my God.
Well, obviously inappropriate. Obviously ought to be reported to HR, and then they were canceled.
That's a little inappropriate. Brian for $5.
Cuomo is being canceled now. Have you guys seen that?
Yeah, I heard about this.
Yeah. Brian for $5 says, have you read the new Jordan Peterson book? Careful, he goes full Jordan Peterson in it. Yes, I have read the new Jordan Peterson book, and I actually thought it was like easily 10 times better than the last one. I thought it was
What
great.
is the new one?
It's called Beyond Order.
Beyond Order, yeah.
I still need to read it. I'm really excited now that you said
the chapter on ideology. To die for. So fucking good. So fun. We should read that. We should read that chapter together, Isaac, that chapter on ideology, because a lot of our disagreement comes down to that fucking chapter. It does.
Mm-hmm. Why are you ignoring Aiden?
Now she's triggered. I just thought it was funny. I don't know. I think it was on the comment about the women in
tech.
No, in the psychology field. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, I think Aiden is more research psychology. So anyway, Aiden also said earlier that she is right libertarian, not conservative. And I have a famous disagreement about how libertarians, I believe, are on the left, and nobody wants to agree with me. But if you look at Jonathan Haidt's research, the libertarians answer pretty much the same as all of the progressives on a lot of different issues. They're just worried where the progressives are worried about corporate power, the libertarians are worried about government power. But they have the same like hatred of power bases, but just a different focus for that. So anyway, we're talking about Haidt. You want to chime in, Drew?
Oh yeah, I mean, another thing that they found with libertarians is that they score like higher than everybody else in reactance.
Yes, psychological reactance.
Interestingly, conservatives score the lowest in reactance, and then liberals are in between them. So it's like almost like you have like a reactance graph going downward. So there's like a lot of overlap, but like on position wise, there'll be more overlap on the right. It's just like psychologically, it's not clear which side they're more closely oriented.
What is reactance?
So psychological reactance is essentially a psychological term for I don't want you to tell me what to do kind of thing. It's kind of that essentially. So,
it's like a reaction formation.
It's kind of, so basically the idea is like if you try to impose something on somebody, if they react to it, they're having a psychological reaction. So the idea is that the people that are highest in that are libertarians. It would sort of intuitively make sense, is like they want the least amount of imposition of other people's will on them, and then it goes, and then it's liberals, and then it's conservatives, I believe.
They answer questions like, I find disagreement with people stimulating, and when somebody tells me that I'm not supposed to do something, I think to myself, that's exactly what I'm going to do.
That is me to a T.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, that's but I don't want, because it's sometimes when I bring this up, the libertarians now hate the left so much because of their co-opting of state power to use against people to make them say crazy words like Z and Zer. The libertarians, according to Haidt's research, are the most rational, the least emotional, as long as it's something that doesn't have to do with you telling me what to do, because then the emotions are like off the charts and they're not necessarily thinking rationally. But the libertarians tend to be the kingmakers in this situation because they're smaller in number, majority male, and they're not, like, loyalty is non-existent in them, so they'll vote conservative or progressive just depending upon policy prescriptions. So a lot of times libertarians, like right now, they're voting with the conservatives, but they could be voting with the progressives. As soon as the conservatives start wielding their God is gonna get us all, and we need to stop having gay marriage, and whatever the conservatives start harping on. So
yeah.
God has lifted his veil of protection from the United States for gay marriage or something.
Oh yeah. Raw 1381 for $5. I really appreciate you, Adam. Please keep the truth as your core principle, and A teams too, of course, obviously. Also, can you tell us what you think of Meghan and Harry? Oh my God.
Oh man.
I don't, I'm speaking out of ignorance, so this is definitely secondhand, because all I heard is basically they went on a interview with Oprah and complained about how oppressed they are when she's literally a fucking princess. And so obviously, 18, we are men of the people. We do not, these cultural elites complaining about how oppressed they are, how Oprah-est they are.
Well, how the media is hounding them while they're talking to Oprah, like the largest media personality.
I just want to say uncategorically, fuck both of them. They can fuck off and die as far as I'm concerned. So yeah,
okay,
there you go.
Well,
Jesus Christ. So I think part of the controversy too is I guess she claimed that she was having issues with suicidality or suicidal ideation or something. I don't know.
Oh my God.
And then so I guess she asserted that she went to part of the royal family about this and they told her to like not talk about it, or they didn't help her or something like that. I don't know exactly what happened.
So it's beyond racism.
Yeah, and then Piers Morgan apparently pushed back on that, and Piers Morgan is now canceled effectively. He's off.
Oh my God,
he's been canceled a dozen times.
Morgan.
Yeah, he's gone.
They got him a decade ago. He's gone again.
Yeah.
So like, irregardless of race, if someone in the royal family came to you and said, "Hey, I'm suicidal," wouldn't you say keep that on the down low? Are they trying to spin that as like a racial thing now? Because they're like, oh, if it was a white person, they would have been front page news.
So I don't actually know the details. I guess the assertion was that she was reaching out for help and they didn't help her and they just gave her that instead, which would be a problem. But I literally don't know enough about this to actually know what happened.
Yeah.
Obviously, if someone's suicidal, they need help. Like, yeah. So I don't know enough details to speak.
That's a very British thing too, about subsuming your emotions and being proper in the face of whatever suffering is going on, keeping a stiff upper lip.
Yeah, well,
one interesting thing I thought about that is one of her complaints was that she said a member of the royal family was concerned about what color their baby would be. And one of the recent Google people that was a guy showed up to work his first day at work, and he said that a supervisor or coworker said how surprised they were that his skin was so light or so dark or whatever the comment was. He brought that to HR. He ended up going on mental health leave and basically being shuffled out the door. Canceled.
That does suck that she's suicidal, if that's the case. Like, don't kill yourself, guys. Fucking get over it.
Get some help.
Like, yeah, exactly.
It gets better.
Yeah.
I mean, you're a princess. You have all the you have all the resources at your disposal.
No, and she's beautiful. Being a beautiful person is pretty much the best privilege you can have.
Totally. Yes. Yeah.
Halo
But
effect.
it sounds like her family situation, her home life, like apparently her father didn't come to the wedding or something, and some of her family members were trying to exploit. Like it sounds like she came from a challenging childhood, so I have more empathy for her. Prince Harry, I don't think he had that. Well, his mom died, but I don't know. I always have more empathy for people who have overcome difficulties.
Lord of the Nerds is coming for you again, Isaac. Isaac has faith in the courts unless it's versus blacks, the courts versus blacks, which actually touches on the talk Isaac and I had earlier in the week.
How so? No, I mean, I thought I was trying to clarify that I don't mean you trust the outcome as the correct legal analysis. It's that you affirm that the outcome is the final word as far as the law goes.
Isaac thinks that OJ's innocent.
What?
I think Michael Jackson's innocent.
Dylan for $5 says you should set up Isaac talking with Distributus since he's a former leftist, academic, and current reactionary. I think it would be really interesting. I think the first talk I had with Distributus, I thought was going to be a friendly chat since I am like a pro religion atheist. So I went into it thinking, like, we have so much in common. This will be great. And the Distributors basically tried to dismantle me. It was like, it was pretty uncomfortable. So I'd be apprehensive about putting Isaac in that kind of situation because I think we might red pill Isaac yet. So, and I should make this clear, Isaac, because a lot of people characterize red pilling as moving from liberal to conservative. And I think that's a complete mischaracterization of the red pill metaphor. I've actually made a video on this. I take down the video because there's some clips from Charlottesville in the video, and like YouTube always doesn't like those clips around. So people ask me to upload it. I upload it. Then my channel gets monetized and it's doing well, so I don't want to risk it. So I take it down. I guess I think it's on BitChute now, so you can see it if you search for it. But the Candace Owens situation. Candace Owens originally called herself Red Pill Black, and that totally bugged the shit out of me because Candace Owens got out of the progressive matrix and went right into the fucking conservative matrix. Like, she didn't get red pilled. She's not living in the real world. Like, me as a centrist, I'm politically homeless right now. I'm in a fucking ship, like running from the fucking crazy AI, right? I'm eating slop. Okay. I don't have the comforts of the fucking matrix like these political people do.
The $100 super chat guy.
Well, no. I'm saying politically, like, as far as centrism goes, these channels that are politically motivated, the $100 super chat is like inconsequential. These guys are making hundreds of thousands of dollars a month stoking political tension. Okay, Isaac, like, it pales in comparison to the chump change our centrist show makes. So we talk about this quite often on my on the Sitch and Adams show, how, you know, stoking those moral intuitions is a path towards making a lot of money for people,
and getting political power and social power.
One of the guys that was making videos about the Trump didn't lose the election stuff made $175,000 in ad revenue in 30 days. Isaac, how's that square up next to my $100 super chat? $175,000.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a lot of motivation to say whatever the hell keeps it flowing.
So but you're denigrating what I'm saying here about me being politically homeless. How the profitable way to be is to be tribalist, so when I'm talking about red pilling, I'm not talking about turning you into conservative. Maybe that's what you think because you came into the situation seeing a person that was not 100% progressively aligned with you on every single political position, and you perceived me as some Trump supporting right winger. No, I'm politically homeless, dude. I'm as progressive in my intuitions as I ever have been. I just see the progressives stoking racial animus in people in a way that I find frankly disgusting, and I can't be part of that. So, and a lot of our disagreements on the show have been over that. So that's where we're at. I hope you understand the difference, right, Isaac?
Yeah, no, I think that's a major sticking point is my belief in systemic institutionalized discrimination and your belief that it's a conversation which is politically expedient, but it doesn't reflect the actual relationship between that. There's no oppression by.
But what my question is, what are you using for evidence of that? Because Haidt goes into this in his book very clearly about the evidence that people are using for systemic racism, and it just doesn't add up.
Well, the most recent one I was looking at was this chance of getting a callback on a resume based on what race the hiring person thinks you are, and they've just did a big meta study of the past 25 years, and nothing's changed.
Right. Yeah, I know the response to that, but let's keep going on super chat to drill through here. Dylan for $5. Did I read this one?
Yeah, you just read this one.
Tributist. I think he's on your Twitter a lot, isn't he?
We interact on Twitter from time to time. Yeah, definitely. He's a good guy. He's super right wing. I mean, way more right wing than me, obviously. So I disagree with him probably on just about everything. I disagree with him on a lot of things, but we do have the religion overlap thing. Lord of the Nerds for $2 said, oh no, wait, I already read that one. Dr. Cataclysm for $5. Adam, why are your schools trying to get children to chant to the Aztec human sacrifice gods in California? I don't have kids, so this is one time when I'm actually glad that we don't have children, because the school system seems so fucking out of control right now.
Is that actually happening? What the hell?
I don't know.
That I've never heard of that, but that
I haven't heard of that either, and that sounds like the kind of hot button cultural issue I'd be all
They
over.
might be trying to open up the portal to actually get the evil demons to come out to rid us of COVID. So that might actually be
it could be one of these like Church of Satan troll things where they just try to do
they do
diametrically opposed sort of idiocy to counterbalance the other side's claimed idiocy.
Yeah,
I don't know. It sounds interesting.
Soupy Colombo for $2 says, irregardless, Adam, I expect better from you. Well, I know. I always expect better from myself.
No, like irregardless is not a word. It's a Palinism. It's irrespective or it's regardless.
It's Doug for $2.
Who was that also? That was the noodle dude. I like that guy. I mean, he was giving me tons of shit the first few episodes, and so.
Soupy Colombo, he's back for you. Stug for $2 says, Gemini Samimi will give you a home, Adam. Hopefully it doesn't come to that.
I appreciate the guts with sunglasses profile picture on that as well for all the Berserk fans out there.
Finally, last super chat. Don't send me any more super chats, guys. We gotta take off. Raw 1381 for $20 says, that's what I wanted to hear. Megan and Harry ran a mental health charity. What? And she says she couldn't find help. What? What was Harry doing? They left the monarchy for safety, privacy, but they have a Netflix deal and are on. Oh,
yeah.
My God. Oh my God. See, and this comes a little bit back to the lying thing that we were talking about, and why I think people fucking lie to themselves all the time. Like you can't look at this Harry and Meghan situation and think these people like have a good read of their internal motivations. It seems like there might be a little self.
Yeah, I think she probably wanted some family support. I think that's what she was expecting rather than professional support. She wanted some family support, and I don't think she was prepared for how really crazy British people, especially the British elite, are about like not being emotional, not discussing any of these things. The stiff upper lip is like the highest. It's the highest standard by which one must comport themselves to a lot of British people. And I know this because I am wholly British on both sides, and a lot of my family that grew up in hippie Marin County are still, all the 80-year-olds are still just like, they won't talk about any of this because it's simply not proper and they're above any of the discussions.
Well, I think this has gone longer than any of our talks. Hopefully you guys find it interesting. Let us know what your thoughts are in the comments below. Drew, do you have a closing statement you want to make?
Sure. If you are interested in psychology or debates or anything like that, I've got a YouTube channel. It's the same name, Drew Welty, DREWWELTY, 2 W's in the middle, on Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube. So you can follow me in those places. I'll be on Prime Kai's Political Royale tonight on Twitch. So if you're curious, then you can go check me out at any of those places.
Sweet. Yeah. And I'll put links to those in the description as soon as you send them to me.
Yep.
Isaac,
I welcome
my
the conversation. I'm excited. If anybody has questions for me, direct them to Adam because I don't give a fuck.
where are we on the red pill meter here? Are we getting closer? I mean, I feel like we've made some progress. You've seen.
Yeah, if anything, I think probably just the standard, very weak argumentative crutches that people fall on, and me seeing like the voting against your interest. I think that's probably one I won't use so quickly anymore unless I can find very specific reasons why I think there's a sort of an incoherence in one position versus the other. But it's a quick little ad hoc troll more than anything else, I think, and it deflects the real issues. So I think I've grown there.
I just want you to see, my goal here is next time you start calling conservatives deluded all willy-nilly, I want you to see Grizzly Adams' face here. This like big lovable smile.
I feel bad, dude, because I think like this time last year I was trolling you a little on Twitter, and then you were so polite about it. I think I stopped trolling you. But I think the first couple interactions I was just being kind of rude. And so if you do dig back to a year ago tweets, I apologize for.
Oh my
jackass.
God!
Adam brings it out in me.
Oh my God! You trolled Drew on Twitter.
I don't remember this. That's hilarious.
Drew is used to it, man. This is what conservatives get all the time. It's fucking bonkers. It's bonkers, man. It's bonkers.
Victims. Yeah. We should do something. Someone ought to do something.
It's okay. I'm resilient enough to take a little Twitter trolling, I promise.
All right, I'll go ahead and leave it there. Thank you guys so much for the super chats. You guys are very generous. Let us know in the comments below what you thought, and we will see you all in the next video, hopefully next Saturday.
Oh, it might be a month. I'm going on the 3-week sabbatical to do some research on the plight of the downtrodden in Waikiki. So I will be.
We'll miss. You guys can miss us, but we'll definitely be back for another one. Take care, everyone.